The wounded German shepherd froze when she spotted Mike Thompson, her amber eyes locking with his across the clearing. Blood matted her tan coat, turning dark beneath the threatening Missouri sky. Mike's fishing rod clattered to the ground as recognition flickered between man and beast. This wasn't a wild encounter. The dog was desperately trying to communicate. Martha Wilson, watching from her porch across the lake, dropped her coffee mug with a shatter that echoed across the water. Even from that distance, she could sense something was terribly wrong. 15 years since he'd touched a dog. 15 years since Max had dragged him from the flames while Sarah and Jamie perished inside. The same military training scars marked this shepherd's ear. "What do you want?" Mike whispered, voice cracking with disuse. The German shepherd whined, turned, and looked back, a universal plea for "follow me." Could he follow where she led, knowing it would reopen wounds he'd spent 15 years trying to cauterize? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The small cabin sat on the eastern shore of Clearwater Lake, Missouri, its weathered exterior a testament to decades of Ozark seasons. Mike Thompson had purchased it with his military pension 15 years ago, drawn to its isolation and the quiet waters that promised fish and, more importantly, solitude. The nearest neighbor, Martha Wilson, lived a quarter-mile down the shoreline, close enough for occasional welfare checks, but distant enough to respect his need for space. At 68, Mike still maintained the rigid posture of his military days. His face, tanned and lined from years under the sun, rarely softened into anything resembling a smile. The Special Forces had taught him discipline. Afghanistan had taught him vigilance. But it was the house fire back home that had taught him about unbearable loss. The photographs remained face down in his dresser drawer. Sarah with her gentle smile and auburn hair, 8-year-old Jamie clutching his Little League trophy. Mike had been halfway around the world when the electrical fire started. By the time he received the Red Cross message and made it home, he had no home to return to. Only Max, his former military working dog who had somehow broken through a window and dragged the neighbor inside, emerged alive. The neighbor survived with burns. Max recovered. Sarah and Jamie were already gone. "Should have been me," became the mantra that followed Mike through discharge processing, through the funeral arrangements, through the move to Clearwater. He'd surrendered Max to another handler, unable to bear the dog's presence when his family couldn't be saved. The military psychiatrist called it survivor's guilt. Mike called it justice. His days assumed a predictable rhythm: fishing at dawn, maintenance on the cabin during daylight, a simple dinner before the evening news. Sometimes, when the nightmares were particularly vivid, he would sit on his dock until sunrise, a bottle of bourbon his only companion. The lake offered silence. Silence offered peace of a sort. Few locals knew about his military background. 3 tours with Special Forces, medals locked away in a footlocker, expertise in handling military working dogs. He'd trained dozens of German shepherds to detect explosives, apprehend enemies, and protect their handlers. His unit had developed specific training techniques that left characteristic marks on the dog's ears, subtle identifiers known only to those in the program. Martha Wilson, a retired Army nurse, recognized a fellow veteran when she saw one. Her occasional casseroles appeared on his porch without comment or expectation. Sometimes she stayed for coffee, most times she didn't. She understood the language of trauma better than most. "Healing comes when you're ready," she'd told him once, after a particularly dark Veterans Day when she'd found him staring into the lake waters. Not a moment sooner. Mike wasn't ready. Hadn't been ready for 15 years, didn't expect to ever be ready. Until the morning the German shepherd appeared at the edge of his property, blood on her coat, desperation in her eyes, and something hauntingly familiar in the way she carried herself, like a soldier on a mission. The morning had begun like any other for Mike Thompson. He'd risen before dawn, made his coffee strong and black, and carried his thermos down to the wooden dock that extended into the cool waters of Clearwater Lake. His fishing gear, rods, tackle box, and the battered chair that had seen better days waited in their usual spot in the small boathouse. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for Mike. It was meditation, a way to quiet the memories that still haunted him after all these years. The lake was particularly still that morning, its surface reflecting the pink-orange glow of sunrise like a perfect mirror. Bass were biting early, and Mike had already caught and released 3 decent-sized fish before the full heat of the Missouri summer day began to assert itself. A slight breeze rippled across the water, bringing with it the scent of pine and the distant rumble of thunder. "Storm coming," Mike muttered to himself, glancing at the darkening clouds on the western horizon. The weather radio had mentioned possible thunderstorms in the afternoon, but nothing severe enough to cut his fishing short. He cast his line again, watching the lure arc gracefully before breaking the surface with barely a splash. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the usual morning chorus of birds and insects. A whimper, followed by the crack of a branch breaking under weight. Mike's military instincts, dulled but never completely forgotten, snapped to attention. He reeled in his line and set the rod aside, rising slowly from his chair. "Hello?" he called, eyes scanning the tree line that separated his property from the surrounding forest. No human response came, but another whimper, more urgent this time, emanated from a cluster of dense undergrowth about 30 yards away. Mike hesitated. His cabin was another 50 yards up the gentle slope from the dock, and inside was the shotgun he kept for emergencies. But something about the sound, pained, desperate, made him step toward the forest instead of retreating to safety. The German shepherd emerged so suddenly that Mike nearly stumbled backward. His heart hammered against his ribs, a surge of adrenaline flooding his system. 15 years since he'd been this close to a dog of this breed, yet the recognition was instantaneous. The alert ears, the intelligent eyes, the powerful build. But this wasn't a healthy, well-trained military animal. This shepherd was wounded, her tan and black coat matted with blood along her left flank, her gait uneven as she took a tentative step toward him. Mike instinctively raised his hands, making himself appear larger, a standard response to a potentially aggressive animal. "Easy now," he said, his voice lower and calmer than he felt. "Easy." The dog stopped and then, to Mike's astonishment, sat down. Not the posture of an animal preparing to attack, but something else entirely. She whined again, a high-pitched sound of distress that seemed directed specifically at him. "You're hurt," Mike observed, lowering his hands slightly. "Someone should take a look at that." But even as he spoke, he knew the nearest veterinarian was in Eldon, nearly 30 miles away. The shepherd whined again, then stood and took several steps toward the forest before looking back at him expectantly. Mike shook his head. "I'm not following you anywhere," he said firmly, as if the dog could understand his every word. Perhaps she could. The German shepherds he'd trained in the military had comprehended complex commands and situations with uncanny intelligence. The dog approached him again, this time close enough that Mike could see the details of her injuries. 3 distinct gashes ran along her side, possibly from barbed wire or a run-in with a larger predator. But there was something else. A small, precise notch in her left ear. Mike's breath caught. That wasn't a random injury. It was a deliberate mark, one he recognized from his military days. Special Forces K9 units marked their dogs this way, a small identifier known only to handlers in the program. "Where did you come from?" he asked, his voice softening despite himself. The dog whined again, more insistently, and again walked a few paces toward the forest before stopping to look back. A memory surfaced. Afghanistan, 2003. A handler injured in the field, his dog traveling 2 miles back to base to lead reinforcements to his location, the same deliberate communication, the same intelligence in those amber eyes. "This is crazy," Mike muttered, but he found himself following as the shepherd led him away from the lake and into the trees. The undergrowth was dense here, but the dog seemed to know exactly where she was going, following what appeared to be a narrow game trail that wound through the forest. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they walked. Clearwater Creek fed into the lake about a half-mile from Mike's property, normally a gentle stream that swelled only during the heaviest spring rains, but the sound he heard now was different, louder, more urgent. As they emerged from the tree line, Mike understood why. Recent rains upstream had turned the usually placid creek into a churning brown torrent that overflowed its banks in several places. The dog led him along the edge, occasionally looking back to ensure he was still following. Then she stopped, her attention fixed on something in the middle of the rushing water. At first, Mike couldn't see what had captured her focus. Then a small, dark shape bobbed briefly above the surface before disappearing again. A puppy, barely visible against the muddy water, desperately clinging to a partially submerged rock about 15 feet from shore. "Jesus Christ," Mike breathed. The mother dog whined pitifully, pacing along the bank. Now her injuries made sense. She'd clearly tried to rescue her pup herself and had been battered by the current or scraped against rocks in the attempt. The puppy looked exhausted, its small head barely above water. As Mike watched, it slipped slightly, regained its precarious hold, then looked toward the shore with what could only be described as desperation. The portable radio clipped to Mike's fishing vest crackled to life, making him jump. The National Weather Service was interrupting regular programming with an urgent announcement. Heavy rainfall upstream has prompted emergency water releases from Truman Dam. Residents near Clearwater Creek should be aware of rapidly rising water levels over the next 2 to 3 hours. Mike looked at the creek, already swollen beyond its banks, then at the puppy, then at the mother dog who had sought him out specifically for help. Something clicked in his mind. She hadn't approached his cabin randomly. She'd seen him fishing, recognized a human who might help, and specifically sought him out. Or was there more to it? That notch in her ear meant military training. Could she somehow sense his background with dogs like her? It seemed impossible, yet the coincidence was too striking to dismiss entirely. "I'm not equipped for this," Mike said aloud, though whether he was speaking to the dog or himself wasn't clear. The puppy slipped again on its rocky perch, this time taking longer to regain its position. Time was running out. The mother dog looked up at him, and in her amber eyes, Mike saw something that pierced through 15 years of carefully constructed barriers. Trust. Complete, unquestioning trust that he would help, that he would know what to do. It was the same look he'd seen in the eyes of his military dogs before missions, when their lives depended on his decisions and expertise. A weight settled in Mike's chest. He hadn't felt responsible for another living thing since the night of the fire. Hadn't wanted to. The risk of failure, of loss, was too great. The puppy slipped again, its small head disappearing momentarily beneath the muddy water before resurfacing with obvious exhaustion. "Damn it all," Mike muttered, already calculating the safest approach to the water, the supplies he'd need, the risks involved. For the first time in 15 years, someone needed him. Even if that someone had 4 legs and couldn't speak, the obligation felt suddenly, inescapably real. The German shepherd whined again, shifting her weight anxiously from paw to paw, her eyes never leaving her struggling puppy. In that moment, Mike recognized her anguish as a mirror of his own on that terrible night. the helplessness of watching loved ones in danger without being able to reach them. "All right," he said, making his decision. "I'll try. But I need to get some equipment first." As if understanding every word, the mother dog followed close at his heels as Mike hurried back toward his cabin, the distant rumble of thunder punctuating the urgency of their mission. The trek back to Mike's cabin seemed to take an eternity, though in reality it was barely 5 minutes. Every few steps, the German Shepherd would stop and look back toward the creek, her anxiety palpable in the way she paced and whined. Mike found himself speaking to her as they hurried along the path. "We'll get to your pup," he assured her, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so many years of silence. "Just need some gear first." Inside the cabin, Mike moved with the efficient precision that had once defined his military career. From a storage closet, he pulled a coil of nylon rope, the same kind he'd used countless times during training exercises. He tested its strength with a sharp tug, muscle memory guiding his hands as he tied a secure bowline knot at one end. Next came a small first aid kit, waterproof matches, and a sharp folding knife that he tucked into his belt. As he gathered supplies, his eyes fell on a dusty photograph lying face down on his bookshelf. He rarely allowed himself to look at it, but something compelled him now. Sarah smiled back at him, Jamie on her lap, both of them caught in a moment of laughter during their last family vacation. Behind them stood Mike, younger and unburdened, with Max sitting dutifully at his side. "I couldn't save you," he whispered to the image of his wife and son. "But maybe." A sharp bark from outside interrupted his thoughts. The mother dog was growing increasingly frantic. Mike grabbed a towel from the bathroom and headed for the door, pausing only to retrieve his old military-issue waterproof watch from the bedside drawer. Time would be critical. Outside, the sky had darkened considerably, the promise of the approaching storm more immediate now. The wind had picked up, bending the tops of the pine trees that surrounded his property. Not ideal conditions for a water rescue, but the alternative, doing nothing, wasn't an option he could live with. "Mike." "What's going on?" The voice startled him. Martha Wilson stood at the edge of his yard, a covered dish in her hands, her usual Tuesday casserole delivery. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and concern etched lines around her eyes as she took in the scene, Mike with rescue equipment, a wounded German Shepherd pacing anxiously nearby. "No time to explain fully," Mike replied, continuing toward the path that led back to the creek. "Puppy trapped in the creek. Water rising. Going to try to get it out." Martha set her casserole on the porch steps and fell into step beside him, her nurse's instincts immediately kicking in as she assessed the situation. "That dog needs medical attention," she observed, eyeing the wounds on the shepherd's flank. "Puppy first," Mike said. "Creek's flooding from the dam release." Martha's eyebrows rose. "The radio said they weren't releasing until this afternoon." Plans changed. "Heard the announcement a few minutes ago." They reached the creek bank, and Martha gasped at the sight of the small puppy still clinging to the rock in the middle of the churning water. The creek had risen even in the short time Mike had been gone, the current visibly stronger. "Good Lord," Martha breathed. "How are you planning to—" But Mike was already in motion, quickly assessing the situation with a tactical eye. The best approach would be from slightly upstream, allowing the current to help carry him to the puppy's position rather than fighting directly against it. He secured one end of the rope to a sturdy oak tree at the water's edge, then began tying the other end around his waist. "Mike, this is crazy," Martha said, watching him prepare. "You're 68 years old. That current could sweep anyone away." "Done crazier things," Mike replied, not looking up from his knot. "Was trained for water rescues." "Part of Special Forces qualification." "That was decades ago." "Some things you don't forget." A memory surfaced as he worked. A river crossing in the Hindu Kush Mountains, icy water up to his chest, his team and their dogs navigating the treacherous current in the dead of night. He had been 40 then, at the peak of his physical condition, but the principles remained the same. Respect the water, work with the current when possible, conserve energy, maintain a secure line. Martha seemed to sense the futility of further argument. Instead, she knelt beside the mother dog, examining her wounds with gentle hands. "She's lost some blood, but the cuts aren't as deep as they look," she reported. "Looks like she got caught in something sharp. Barbed wire, maybe, or debris in the water." Mike nodded, completing his preparations. He'd removed his boots and outer shirt, leaving just a t-shirt and pants that wouldn't weigh him down too much in the water. The rope was secure around his waist, with enough slack to reach the puppy, but not so much that he'd be swept too far downstream. "If something goes wrong," he told Martha, meeting her eyes directly for perhaps the first time in all the years they'd been neighbors, "there's a metal box under my bed. Has my discharge papers, will, insurance information." Martha's face softened. "Nothing's going wrong, Mike Thompson. But I'll keep an eye on the line from here, and I've got my cell phone to call for help if needed." Mike nodded, then turned his attention to the mother dog, who was watching him with an intensity that seemed almost human. He crouched down to her eye level. "I'm going to get your pup," he said simply. "You stay here with Martha." As if understanding, the dog whined softly, but remained beside Martha when Mike approached the water's edge. The creek had risen another inch or two in just the time they'd been talking, its muddy surface littered with debris, branches, leaves, even a plastic bucket tumbling along in the current. Mike took a deep breath, feeling the familiar pre-mission focus settle over him. The world narrowed to the objective: reach the puppy, secure it, return to shore. Everything else, the approaching storm, his age, the years of isolation, even the painful memories, faded to background noise. He waded in carefully at his chosen entry point, 15 yards upstream from where the puppy clung to its precarious perch. The water was shockingly cold despite the summer heat, and the force of the current stronger than it appeared from shore. By the time it reached his knees, he could feel it pulling at him insistently. "Take it slow," Martha called from the bank, echoing what Mike already knew. Rushing would be fatal, for him and for the puppy. At waist deep, the true power of the water became apparent. Mike leaned into the current, using techniques he'd learned decades ago to maintain his balance. Each step was deliberate, his feet feeling for stable footing on the creek bed before committing his weight. A flash of memory. Training recruits for water crossings in North Carolina, demonstrating the proper technique for maintaining stability in moving water. "The river always wins a direct confrontation," he'd told them. "Work with it, not against it." Chest deep now, the cold beginning to seep into his bones despite the summer air. The puppy was only a few yards away, its small form still visible on the rock. It had stopped struggling, a worrying sign of exhaustion or worse. "Almost there, little one," Mike called, unsure if the puppy could even hear him over the rush of water. Behind him the rope played out steadily, his lifeline to the shore where Martha and the mother dog watched anxiously. A sudden surge in the current nearly took his feet out from under him. Mike compensated, leaning harder into the flow, but felt a twinge in his left shoulder. An old injury from his final deployment, a souvenir of a night parachute jump gone wrong. He gritted his teeth against the pain and pressed on. 3 feet from the puppy now. Close enough to see it was a German shepherd too, probably no more than 8 weeks old, its dark fur plastered against its tiny body. Its eyes were half closed, but at Mike's approach they opened fully, the same amber color as its mother's, filled with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "I've got you," Mike said, reaching out slowly so as not to startle the puppy or disturb its precarious position. "Easy now." His fingers brushed wet fur, then gained purchase. With exquisite care, he lifted the puppy from its rocky sanctuary. It was limp in his hands, but a faint whimper confirmed it was still alive. Mike tucked the small body against his chest, using one arm to cradle it while the other helped maintain his balance against the current. "Got it!" he called back to shore, where Martha visibly sagged with relief. The mother dog barked once, straining forward but still obediently staying put. The return journey would be trickier. Mike would have to angle himself to work with the current while not being swept too far downstream. The added challenge of keeping the puppy's head above water while maintaining his own balance made each step a careful calculation. He was halfway back when he heard Martha shout, her voice barely audible over the rushing water and the distant rumble of thunder. Looking up, he saw her pointing urgently upstream. A large branch, at least 6 feet long, was tumbling toward him in the current, rolling and pitching in the turbulent water. Mike adjusted his position, angling to avoid the oncoming debris, but the movement cost him his secure footing. His left foot slipped on a mossy rock, pitching him sideways into the full force of the current. For a heart-stopping moment, he was fully submerged. The puppy clutched tightly to his chest, the world reduced to cold, brown turbulence. The rope around his waist snapped taut, arresting his downstream tumble and allowing him to regain his footing. He broke the surface with a gasp, relieved to feel the puppy still secure in his grasp, still breathing. "Mike!" Martha's voice was taut with fear. "Are you all right?" He raised one hand in acknowledgement, not wasting breath on words. The branch had passed harmlessly by during his momentary submersion, but the incident had shaken him. His shoulder throbbed with renewed intensity, and the cold was beginning to affect his coordination. With renewed determination, Mike angled toward shore, each step deliberate despite the fatigue creeping into his muscles. The shore seemed to approach with agonizing slowness, but finally, blessedly, the water level dropped to his waist, then his knees. Martha waded in ankle-deep to offer her arm for support as he emerged from the creek, the puppy still clutched protectively against his chest. The mother dog could contain herself no longer. She bounded forward, whining and circling Mike as he gently laid the puppy on the grassy bank. The small creature was breathing but unresponsive, its body temperature dangerously low despite the summer heat. "We need to warm it up," Martha said, already unfolding the towel Mike had brought, "and get both of them to a vet as soon as possible." Mike nodded, suddenly feeling every one of his 68 years. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was ebbing, leaving behind exhaustion and a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the creek water soaking his clothes. But as he watched the mother dog gently nuzzle her puppy, something else rose within him, a feeling so long absent he almost didn't recognize it: purpose. For the first time in 15 years, he had acted decisively to save a life, had put himself at risk for something beyond his own day-to-day existence. "I'll call Dr. Reynolds in Eldon," Martha said, already pulling out her cell phone. "He's the best veterinarian in the county, and he owes me a favor from when I helped his mother after her surgery." Mike barely heard her. He was looking at the mother dog's ear again, at that distinctive notch that marked her as military-trained. It wasn't just similar to the marks he'd seen before, it was identical to the program he had helped develop. This dog, or her lineage, had connections to his past, to the life he'd left behind when he buried Sarah and Jamie. "Mike?" Martha's voice broke through his thoughts. "Dr. Reynolds can see them right away, but we need to get them to his clinic." "My car's at my place." Mike nodded, carefully rewrapping the puppy in the towel. "We'll take my truck," he said, his decision made. "It's closer, and there's an old blanket in the back for the mother." As they gathered the dogs and headed back toward his cabin, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, the storm finally arriving in earnest. But for the first time in years, Mike Thompson was moving with purpose towards something, not away from the past that haunted him. Mike's old Ford pickup rumbled to life on the second try, the engine protesting briefly before settling into a familiar rhythm. The mother German Shepherd lay in the truck bed on a worn, moving blanket Martha had found in Mike's storage shed, unwilling to be separated from her puppy, but too large to fit comfortably in the cab. The puppy, still worryingly still, was nestled in Martha's lap, wrapped in towels as she sat in the passenger seat. "Keep Route 7 or take the back way?" Mike asked as they pulled onto the gravel road that connected his property to the main highway. His clothes were still damp, but he'd thrown on a dry flannel shirt before they left. His hands, he noticed, were steadier than they'd been in years. "Back way," Martha replied without hesitation. "There's construction on 7, and with this rain starting, it'll be backed up for miles." Mike nodded and turned right at the fork, taking the winding county road that snaked through the forested hills toward Eldon. The rain was coming down harder now, fat drops that exploded on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. In the rear-view mirror, he could see the mother dog lying down, seemingly unconcerned about the weather, her eyes fixed on the back window where she could keep watch over her pup. "She's remarkable," Martha commented, following his gaze. "Most dogs would be panicking, but she's completely focused on her puppy. Military training shows." Mike's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "About that," he said, keeping his eyes on the increasingly slick road. "The mark on her ear. It's not just any military training program." "What do you mean?" "It's from the Special Operations K-9 unit. Specifically, the identification system I helped develop in the early 2000s. Each marking is unique to the training facility and the dog's specialty." Martha looked at him sharply. "You never mentioned you worked with military dogs." "A lot of things I never mentioned." Mike navigated around a fallen branch, the truck's tires briefly losing traction before finding purchase again. "This particular marking, the notch on the upper left ear with the small scar below it, that's from the explosive detection program at Fort Bragg. Very specific training, very select dogs." "So she's military?" "Was, most likely. But something's not right. These dogs don't just end up as strays, especially not with puppies. They're either active duty, retired with their handlers, or placed in specialized adoption programs." As if aware they were discussing her, the mother dog raised her head, amber eyes meeting Mike's in the rearview mirror. There was intelligence there and something else, a silent communication that transcended species. "She sought me out," Mike said quietly. "Of all the properties around that lake, she came to mine." "Maybe she smelled your fishing gear," Martha suggested practically. "Or heard you moving around." Mike shook his head. "It's more than that. When I approached her, she didn't run, didn't show fear or aggression. She acted like—" He hesitated, aware of how it would sound. "Like she knew me, or knew what I was." Martha was silent for a moment, her attention divided between the road ahead and the puppy in her lap. "Sometimes animals sense things we can't explain," she finally said. "My grandmother used to say dogs can see into your soul." The county road narrowed as it wound through a particularly dense section of forest, the branches of oak and hickory forming a canopy that creaked and swayed in the strengthening wind. Mike slowed the truck, wary of fallen limbs and washed-out sections of road. They were still at least 20 minutes from Eldon, and the storm was intensifying. "How's the pup doing?" he asked, changing the subject. Martha's expression was guarded. "Breathing steady, but he's still very cold. Not responding much." Mike nodded grimly and pressed the accelerator a little harder, calculating risks against necessity. The sooner they reached Dr. Reynolds, the better the puppy's chances. They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the drumming of rain on the roof, the rhythmic swish of wipers, and the occasional low whine from the mother dog in the truck bed. Mike found his mind drifting back to Afghanistan, to the dogs he'd trained and the lives they'd saved by detecting IEDs and warning of ambushes. He remembered one mission in particular, a night operation in a remote valley near the Pakistan border. His team had been accompanied by 3 German shepherds, one of which had alerted just in time to prevent the lead vehicle from triggering a roadside bomb. The dog, a female named Echo, had received a commendation for her actions. She'd had the same amber eyes as the mother dog now watching over her puppy. "Mike, watch out!" Martha's warning snapped him back to the present. A large tree branch had fallen across half the road ahead, its leafy extremities dancing in the wind. Mike swerved to avoid it, the truck's tires sliding slightly on the wet pavement before he regained control. "Sorry," he muttered, refocusing on the drive. Got lost in thought. Martha's gaze was knowing. Memories? Afghanistan. The dogs we worked with. He shook his head slightly. Feels like another lifetime. It was, Martha said simply, but it shaped who you are now. Who he was now. Mike hadn't given much thought to that concept in years. He'd defined himself by who he had been, a husband, a father, a soldier, and by what he had lost. The present had merely been something to endure, a penance for failing to be there when his family needed him most. And yet today, for the first time in 15 years, he'd acted instead of merely existing. He'd put himself at risk for another life, had felt the old instincts kick in, assess, decide, execute. The military precision that had once defined him wasn't completely gone after all. The puppy in Martha's lap stirred slightly, a small whimper escaping its muzzle. Immediately from the truck bed came an answering whine from the mother. "That's a good sign," Martha said, relief evident in her voice. "He's responding." Mike allowed himself a brief smile. Tough little guy, takes after his mother. They were approaching the outskirts of Eldon now, the forest giving way to scattered houses and small farms. The rain had slackened somewhat, though dark clouds still hung low over the landscape. Martha directed him through a series of turns, eventually guiding them to a modest clinic set back from the main road, its sign, Reynolds Veterinary Services, illuminated despite the gray afternoon light. "Pull around back," Martha instructed. "Bill said he'd meet us at the service entrance." As Mike navigated the truck into the small parking area behind the clinic, a side door opened, revealing a tall, thin man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair framing a face weathered by years of working with large farm animals as well as pets. Dr. William Reynolds had been Eldon's veterinarian for nearly 3 decades, his practice a fixture in the rural community. "Martha," he greeted as they parked, already moving toward the truck with a large umbrella. "Bring the puppy in first. I've got the exam room ready." Mike cut the engine and quickly moved to the truck bed to attend to the mother dog. She was already on her feet, eyes fixed on Martha as she carefully carried the towel-wrapped puppy toward the clinic door. A low, anxious whine escaped her throat. "It's all right, girl," Mike said, his voice taking on the same calm, authoritative tone he'd used with military working dogs. "Your pup's in good hands. Come on now." To his mild surprise, the dog responded immediately to his tone, jumping down from the truck bed but staying close to his side as they followed Martha and Dr. Reynolds into the clinic. The familiar smells of antiseptic and animal dander brought back more memories, bringing Max in for his vaccinations, Jamie clutching the puppy to his chest, nervous but excited. The examination room was brightly lit and clinically clean, a metal table in the center where Martha was already placing the puppy. Dr. Reynolds moved with efficient precision, unwrapping the towels and immediately beginning his assessment. "How long was he in the water?" the veterinarian asked, not looking up from his examination. "Unknown," Mike replied. "I found them maybe 45 minutes ago. The mother was injured. The pup stranded on a rock in Clearwater Creek." Dr. Reynolds nodded, his stethoscope pressed to the puppy's tiny chest. Heart rates slow but steady, breathing shallow, definite hypothermia. He looked up at the mother dog who was standing tensely at Mike's side, her eyes never leaving her puppy. "And Mom here? Those cuts need attention." "After the pup is stable," Mike said firmly. Dr. Reynolds seemed about to argue, then apparently thought better of it. "Martha, can you assist? I need to start warming him gradually and get some fluids going." Martha nodded, immediately stepping into the role of nurse as if she'd never left the profession. She moved around the room with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies as Dr. Reynolds directed while Mike stood with the mother dog, a hand resting reassuringly on her head. "German Shepherd, purebred from the looks of it," Dr. Reynolds commented as he worked. "About 8 weeks for the pup. Mom's what, 3, 4 years old?" "Approximately," Mike confirmed. "She's military trained, Special Forces K-9 unit." Dr. Reynolds looked up sharply. "Military? What's she doing out here unaccompanied? That's what I'd like to know." As the veterinarian and Martha continued working on the puppy, Mike examined the mother more closely. Beyond the wounds on her flank, which had mostly stopped bleeding, she was in good physical condition. Coat relatively healthy despite recent events, muscle tone excellent, teeth clean and intact. This wasn't a long-term stray. She'd been well cared for until very recently. The notch in her ear drew his attention again. During his time with the Special Forces, each working dog had received this marking during their final certification, a practice that had started as a field expedient and eventually became standard procedure. The particular style of this notch, precise with the small scar below, was distinctive to one training facility. "Fort Bragg, 2005 to 2010, Mike murmured to himself. "Explosive detection and handler protection, dual certification." The mother dog looked up at him, ears perked forward at the familiar terminology. The recognition in her eyes was unmistakable. "You know those words, don't you, girl?" Mike said softly, crouching to her level. "You were trained for this." From the examination table came a more vigorous whimper. The puppy was becoming more responsive as Dr. Reynolds and Martha worked. The mother dog's attention immediately shifted back to her offspring, her whole body tensing with anticipation. "He's stabilizing, Doctor," Reynolds announced, relief evident in his voice. "Temperature's coming up, heart rate strengthening. Martha, can you keep monitoring while I check Mom here?" The mother dog allowed Dr. Reynolds to approach, though she remained alert, her eyes frequently darting to the examination table where her puppy lay. The veterinarian's gentle hands probed her wounds, eliciting only the slightest flinch. "Clean cuts," he observed. "Not from natural causes. These were made by something sharp, a knife, possibly, or very sharp metal. And recent, within the last 24 hours, I'd say." Mike felt a chill that had nothing to do with his still damp clothes. "Someone did this to her?" "Looks that way. And there's something else." Dr. Reynolds parted the fur on the dog's neck, revealing what appeared to be a healing abrasion around her entire neck. Collar was removed, forcefully from the looks of it, left marks where it was yanked off. The implication settled heavily in the room. A military-trained dog, deliberately wounded, her identification collar forcibly removed, found with a puppy in a remote area. None of it suggested a happy story. "Bill," Martha spoke up from beside the puppy, "he's got something around his neck. Some kind of thin cord." Dr. Reynolds moved quickly back to the examination table. The puppy had indeed been wearing something almost invisible against its dark fur. A thin, black cord, barely thicker than fishing line, with what appeared to be a small metal cylinder attached to it. "What in the world?" the veterinarian muttered, carefully removing the makeshift collar. The metal cylinder, no larger than a pill capsule, seemed to be sealed at both ends. Some kind of identification? Mike took the object, turning it over in his fingers. Military instincts, dormant for years, suddenly flared to life. "This isn't standard issue for any working dog program I know," he said slowly. "But it's definitely man-made, deliberately attached." "Could it be a microchip?" Martha suggested. "Some alternative to the usual implanted kind?" "Maybe," Mike wasn't convinced. The capsule felt too substantial for just a microchip, and the design was unlike anything he'd seen in either military or civilian use. "Can we open it?" Dr. Reynolds rummaged in a drawer and produced a set of small surgical tools. "Let me try. It appears to be threaded at one end." While the veterinarian worked on the mysterious capsule, Mike returned his attention to the mother dog, who had relaxed somewhat now that her puppy was showing signs of recovery. She leaned against his leg in a gesture of either fatigue or trust, possibly both. "What happened to you, girl?" he murmured, stroking her damp fur. "And how did you end up at my doorstep?" "Got it," Dr. Reynolds announced, having successfully opened one end of the metal cylinder. He carefully tipped the contents onto a clean surgical tray, a tightly rolled piece of what appeared to be waterproof paper. Martha picked up a pair of tweezers and gently unrolled the paper, revealing what appeared to be a series of numbers and letters written in smudged but legible ink. "SKE47F05BR," Mike read aloud, the combination immediately triggering recognition. "That's a military identification code. SK is Special Canine, E47 would be the individual dog identifier, F05 is the training cycle, February 2005, and BR is Fort Bragg." "So this confirms she's military," Martha said. "Yes, but there's more." Mike pointed to additional writing below the identifier. "Coordinates, GPS location." He looked up, meeting Martha's concerned gaze. "Someone wanted this information found." "Like a message in a bottle," Dr. Reynolds mused, checking the puppy's vital signs again. "But why put it on the pup instead of the mother?" The answer hit Mike with sudden clarity. "Because the mother might not make it." He looked at the German Shepherd with new understanding. She was injured, possibly being pursued. The puppy was her insurance policy. If she died trying to find help, at least the information would survive with her pup. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. This wasn't a simple case of a stray dog and her puppy. This was something more complex, possibly more dangerous. Dr. Reynolds broke the silence. "Well, whatever the story is, they both need rest and care now. The pup's stabilized, but he's weak. Mom needs those wounds cleaned and stitched, and I'd recommend keeping them overnight for observation." "I'll pay whatever it costs," Mike said immediately, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "And I want to stay with them." Martha and Dr. Reynolds exchanged a glance that Mike couldn't quite interpret. Finally, the veterinarian nodded. "There's a cot in my office you can use." "Martha, can you help me set up the recovery kennel? We'll need to make it large enough for Mom to stay with her pup." As they bustled about making arrangements, Mike remained beside the mother dog, his hand resting on her head. The GPS coordinates weighed heavily on his mind. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to send this information out into the world, trusting that whoever found it would understand its significance. And by some twist of fate, or perhaps by the dog's deliberate choice, that someone was him. A retired Special Forces soldier with experience in the exact K9 program this dog had come from. The coincidence was too perfect to be random. The mother dog looked up at him, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to ask a question. Mike found himself nodding, as if in answer to an unspoken request. "Don't worry, girl," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." The night passed slowly in Dr. Reynolds' veterinary clinic. Mike dozed intermittently on the office cot, waking at every whimper or movement from the large recovery kennel where the mother German Shepherd and her puppy rested. The storm outside had intensified, rain drumming against the roof and occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the darkened clinic through the blinds. Around midnight, Mike awoke to find the mother dog standing at the kennel door, watching him intently. Her wounds had been cleaned and stitched, a white bandage wrapped around her midsection. The puppy slept peacefully on a heating pad in the corner of the kennel, his tiny chest rising and falling with stronger breaths than before. "You should be resting," Mike told the mother dog softly, rising from the cot with a wince as his shoulder protested. The swim in Clearwater Creek had aggravated his old injury more than he'd initially realized. The dog whined softly, pawing at the kennel door. After checking that the puppy was stable, Mike unlatched the door and let her out. Instead of heading for the clinic's back door, as he half expected, she simply walked to his side and sat down, leaning slightly against his leg. "Keeping watch, huh?" Mike murmured, understanding the instinct all too well. How many nights in Afghanistan had he lain awake, alert to every sound, responsible for the lives of his team? The weight of that vigilance was familiar, almost comforting in its certainty. He sat down on the floor beside her, his back against the wall. After a moment's hesitation, he placed his hand on her head, stroking gently behind her ears. The dog sighed, some of the tension leaving her powerful frame. "What's your story?" Mike asked quietly. "Where did you come from? And why me?" The dog had no answers, of course, but her presence beside him in the quiet clinic felt significant nonetheless. Two survivors, keeping watch together in the night. At some point, Mike must have dozed off again because the next thing he knew, early morning light was filtering through the blinds, and Dr. Reynolds was standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," the veterinarian said, offering one to Mike. "Looks like you two bonded overnight." Mike accepted the coffee gratefully, realizing the mother dog was still pressed against his side, both of them having slept sitting up against the wall. "How's the puppy? See for yourself." Dr. Reynolds gestured toward the kennel, where the small German shepherd was awake, wobbly but on his feet, exploring his surroundings with tentative steps. The mother dog was immediately alert, rising to check on her offspring. Dr. Reynolds opened the kennel door, allowing her to enter and reunite with her puppy. The gentleness with which the powerful dog nuzzled and inspected her young was striking. "Remarkable recovery," Dr. Reynolds commented, sipping his coffee. "Both of them, really. That pup was in serious condition when you brought him in, and Mom's wounds could have easily become infected if left untreated." Mike watched the reunion with an unexpected tightness in his chest. "So they'll be okay?" "With proper care, yes. The puppy will need close monitoring for a few days, and Mom's stitches will need to stay in for about 2 weeks, but overall, the prognosis is good." Dr. Reynolds studied Mike over the rim of his coffee cup. "The question is, what happens to them now?" It was a good question. The GPS coordinates found in the capsule around the puppy's neck suggested there was more to the story, possibly something dangerous. But without more information, Mike was reluctant to involve authorities who might not understand the significance of a military-trained dog appearing with coded information. "I'd like to take them with me," Mike said, the decision forming even as he spoke the words. "At least until I can figure out where they came from and what those coordinates mean." Dr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "I thought you might say that Martha mentioned you used to work with military dogs. Seems fitting somehow." He paused. "Speaking of Martha, she called a little while ago. Said she'd stop by with some breakfast and clean clothes for you." Mike glanced down at his still damp attire from yesterday's rescue. In the urgency of getting the dogs to the clinic, he hadn't thought to grab a change of clothes. "That's thoughtful of her." "Martha Wilson is the most thoughtful person in 3 counties, Dr. Reynolds said with a smile, "and the most persistent. When she decides someone needs looking after, resistance is futile." Mike found himself smiling slightly in return, the expression feeling foreign on his face after so many years of solitude. "I've noticed, Doctor." Reynolds excused himself to attend to other patients beginning to arrive for morning appointments, leaving Mike alone with the two German shepherds. The puppy had gained confidence in the last few minutes, exploring the kennel with greater steadiness and occasionally pouncing playfully on his mother's tail. Mike retrieved the metal capsule and the paper with coordinates from where Dr. Reynolds had left them on the desk. In the light of day, he examined them more carefully. The coordinates, when plotted, would lead to a location somewhere in western Missouri, not too distant from Clearwater Lake, if his mental geography was correct. But what would be found there? The front door chime of the clinic interrupted his thoughts. Moments later, Martha appeared in the doorway, carrying a paper bag that emitted the promising aroma of fresh biscuits and a plastic shopping bag that presumably contained clothes. "Good morning," she greeted, her eyes immediately going to the kennel where the two dogs were now visible. "Oh, look at them! The puppy's up and about!" Mike accepted the offerings with murmured thanks, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. "Dr. Reynolds says they're both recovering well." Martha set down her purse and approached the kennel, crouching to observe the dogs. The mother dog regarded her calmly, apparently having accepted her as an ally during yesterday's rescue and treatment. "I picked up some basics at the general store," Martha explained, gesturing to the shopping bag. "Just jeans and a couple of shirts. Guessed at your size." "I appreciate it." Mike hesitated, then added, "And thank you for yesterday, for helping with the rescue, for calling Dr. Reynolds, for all of it." Martha's expression softened. "That's the most words you've strung together in my presence in 15 years, Mike Thompson." He ducked his head, acknowledging the truth of her observation. "Been a long time since I had much to say." "Well, you've got plenty to say now, I expect." Martha nodded toward the dogs. "Starting with what you plan to do with these two." Mike shared his intention to take the dogs home with him, at least temporarily, and his curiosity about the coordinates. Martha listened attentively, her practical nature evident in the question she asked. "You think this dog might have been deliberately sent to find you?" she asked, skepticism clear in her tone. "Not me, specifically," Mike clarified, "but someone with military background, someone who would recognize the markings and codes. It's too much of a coincidence otherwise. A Special Forces K-9 unit dog just happens to seek help from a retired Special Forces K-9 handler." Martha considered this. "So, what's your next step? Check out these coordinates?" "Yes, but carefully." Mike's military instincts were fully awake now, assessing potential risks and planning accordingly. "Someone injured this dog, possibly trying to prevent her from delivering this information. That suggests whatever's at those coordinates is sensitive, maybe dangerous." "Then you should contact the authorities," Martha said reasonably. Mike shook his head. "Not yet. Without knowing what this is about, I can't be sure who to trust. What if this involves military corruption or illegal operations? Going through official channels could alert the wrong people." Martha sighed. "You military types and your conspiracies. Couldn't this just be a lost dog who happened to have some identification? With fresh knife wounds? With coordinates hidden in a waterproof capsule around her puppy's neck? With military training markers that match my exact area of expertise?" Mike shook his head. Too many coincidences. Before Martha could respond, the puppy let out a series of high-pitched barks, demanding attention. The sound broke the tension, and Martha smiled. "Well, whatever the mystery is, these two need looking after first," she said practically. "Why don't you get changed, have some breakfast, and we'll see about getting them released to go home with you?" Mike nodded, accepting the shopping bag and retreating to the small bathroom to change. The clothes Martha had selected fit reasonably well: jeans, a flannel shirt, and a lightweight jacket. As he dressed, he caught sight of his reflection in the mirror above the sink. The face that stared back at him was still weathered and lined, but something had changed in the eyes. The flat emptiness that had been his constant companion for 15 years had been replaced by something else: focus, purpose, perhaps even a spark of the man he had once been. When he emerged, Dr. Reynolds had returned and was examining the puppy one final time. The little German shepherd was putting up a valiant protest, wriggling and play-biting at the veterinarian's hands. "Definitely feeling better, Doctor." Reynolds chuckled, releasing the squirming puppy back to his mother. "I've prepared some antibiotics for Mom's wounds, painkillers for both if needed, and puppy formula to supplement nursing since Mom's been through a trauma." "What do I owe you?" Mike asked, reaching for his wallet. Dr. Reynolds named a figure that, while substantial, was less than Mike had feared. As he counted out the cash, Martha and the veterinarian exchanged a look he couldn't quite interpret. "I've included a discount," Dr. Reynolds explained, seeing Mike's questioning expression. "Martha told me about the rescue. Not many people would risk their lives for a dog and her pup. Seems like the least I can do." Mike nodded his thanks, somewhat uncomfortable with the recognition. He hadn't acted for praise. He'd simply responded to a need, following instincts long buried but apparently not forgotten. With the mother dog on a makeshift leash fashioned from rope and the puppy secured in a small carrier borrowed from the clinic, they prepared to leave. Dr. Reynolds provided final instructions for care and follow-up, which Mike listened to with the same intensity he'd once given mission briefings. "I've entered your number in my contacts," Martha said as they loaded the dogs into Mike's truck. "I'll check in later to see how they're settling in." Mike hesitated, then made a decision. "Actually, would you mind following me back? I could use help getting them situated and—" He trailed off, unaccustomed to asking for assistance. Martha's smile was warm. "Of course. I'll be right behind you." The drive back to Clearwater Lake was significantly easier than the journey to Eldon had been. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean landscape glistening in the morning sunlight. The mother dog rode in the cab this time, the puppy's carrier secured beside her with the seatbelt. She sat regally upright, occasionally glancing at Mike as if to confirm he was still there, still part of their unexpected alliance. As they turned onto the gravel road leading to his cabin, Mike found himself viewing the familiar landscape with new eyes. For 15 years, this place had been his refuge, his self-imposed exile from a world that had taken everything he loved. Now, suddenly, his isolated cabin would have new occupants, new life within its walls. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Martha pulled in behind him as he parked near the cabin's front porch. Together they unloaded the dogs, the medications, and the supplies Dr. Reynolds had provided. The mother dog seemed hesitant at first, sniffing cautiously at the cabin's perimeter before allowing herself to be led inside. The puppy, however, showed no such reservation, squirming enthusiastically in his carrier, eager to explore new territory. Inside, Mike was suddenly, acutely aware of how sparse and utilitarian his living space had become. A single armchair faced the wood stove, a small table held a radio and a reading lamp, and bookshelves lined one wall, the only concession to comfort or culture. The kitchen was basic but functional, and a narrow hallway led to the bedroom and bathroom. Nothing decorative, nothing personal, a place to exist, not to live. "It's not much," he said awkwardly as Martha surveyed the space. "It's a home," she replied simply. "And now it's theirs, too." She nodded toward the dogs, the mother now methodically inspecting each corner of the main room while the puppy, released from his carrier, wobbled excitedly after her. Mike watched them, a strange feeling expanding in his chest. For 15 years he had defined himself by absence, the absence of his family, the absence of purpose, the absence of connection. Now, suddenly, his space was filled with presence. The attentive presence of Martha, the vigilant presence of the mother dog, the exuberant presence of the puppy. "They'll need names," Martha observed, setting down the bag of medications on the kitchen counter. Mike hadn't thought that far ahead. Names implied permanence, a commitment beyond the immediate crisis. Yet, as he watched the mother dog complete her inspection of the cabin and return to his side, sitting at attention as if awaiting orders, he knew a name had already formed in his mind. "Stella," he said quietly. "Her name is Stella." Martha looked at him curiously. "That's specific. Any reason?" Mike nodded, memories surfacing from his military days. "It was the code name for a mission in Afghanistan where a K-9 unit saved my team from an ambush. The dog's name was Echo, but the mission was Stella. Seemed fitting. And the puppy?" Mike watched the small German shepherd attempting to climb onto the armchair, his determination comical given his still wobbly legs. "I'm thinking Max," he said, the name both an acknowledgement of the past and a bridge to whatever future was now unfolding. "After a dog I once knew." Martha's expression told him she understood the significance. "Stella and Max," she repeated. "Good names." As if responding to their new identities, both dogs perked up their ears. Stella moved to check on her puppy, helping him navigate down from the chair with gentle guidance. The domesticity of the scene was so unexpected, so at odds with the last 15 years of Mike's existence, that he found himself momentarily disoriented. "What happens now?" Martha asked, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate logistics of dog care. Mike took a deep breath, decision crystallizing. "First, we get them settled. Then I need to check those coordinates, figure out what Stella was trying to tell us." "Us?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "Me," Mike corrected, then paused. "Unless you want to be involved. I'd understand if you didn't. Could be nothing, could be trouble." Martha considered him for a long moment, her practical nature visibly weighing options. Finally, she nodded. "I'm already involved, Mike Thompson. Might as well see it through." Relief washed through him, though he hadn't realized he'd been hoping for her agreement. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Martha warned, though her eyes were kind. "Let's see what those coordinates hold before either of us decides this was a good idea." As if understanding the gravity of the conversation, Stella approached them both, looking from one to the other with those intelligent amber eyes. Whatever message she had been tasked with delivering, whatever danger she had faced to bring it to Mike, she had succeeded. Now it was up to him to honor that courage by uncovering the truth hidden in the coordinates she had carried. The puppy, Max, tumbled over to join them, his recovery seemingly complete as he playfully attacked Mike's shoelaces. The contrast was stark. The serious mission represented by the coordinates and Stella's injuries versus the innocent playfulness of the puppy, now making himself at home in Mike's cabin. Life and purpose had found Mike Thompson again, arriving in the most unexpected form, a wounded German shepherd with a mission and her resilient puppy. After 15 years of existing in the shadows of loss, he was being called back into the light, and this time he would not face the challenge alone. Settling Stella and Max into the cabin proved easier than Mike had anticipated. The mother dog seemed to understand boundaries instinctively, quickly learning which areas were accessible and which were off-limits. The puppy, still wobbly but gaining strength by the hour, required more supervision, his boundless curiosity leading him to investigate every corner, cable, and potentially dangerous item within reach. Martha stayed through the afternoon, helping Mike create makeshift dog beds from old blankets and set up water bowls in the kitchen. She'd made a quick trip to her own cabin and returned with an old baby gate she'd kept in storage, just in case, which they installed to block off the narrow hallway leading to Mike's bedroom. "You'll need proper supplies," she noted, watching as Max attempted to drag a sock nearly as large as himself across the living room floor. "Food, leashes, toys, proper beds." Mike nodded, making mental calculations. His military pension would cover the expenses, though he'd need to dip into savings for any significant veterinary bills. "I'll drive into town tomorrow, pick up what they need." "I can come with you," Martha offered. "The Eldon Pet Supply has good quality items, but you need to know what to look for." "I'd appreciate that," Mike said, surprising himself with how easily he accepted her help. 15 years of self-imposed isolation had created habits of independence that were hard to break, yet here he was, planning a shopping trip with his neighbor as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As evening approached, Martha reluctantly prepared to leave. "Call if you need anything during the night," she insisted, writing her number on a notepad by the phone. Puppies this age can be a handful, especially after trauma. Mike walked her to her car, Stella following attentively while Max remained safely inside, temporarily contained in a laundry basket lined with towels. The evening air was cool and fresh after yesterday's storm, the lake gleaming in the golden light of sunset. "Thank you," Mike said as Martha opened her car door. "For everything." She studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You know, in all the years we've been neighbors, I don't think I've ever seen you look so present, like you're actually here, not just going through the motions." Mike didn't know how to respond to that observation, uncomfortably accurate as it was. For 15 years, he had existed rather than lived, moving through each day as if underwater, muffled and distant from the world around him. Martha didn't seem to expect a response. She simply smiled, patted his arm lightly, and got into her car. "Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. We'll get those supplies, and then maybe take a look at those coordinates." After she drove away, Mike returned to the cabin to find Max had somehow escaped the laundry basket and was now curled up against Stella's side on the blanket bed they'd created near the wood stove. The mother dog looked up as Mike entered but didn't move, clearly unwilling to disturb her sleeping puppy. "Long day for both of you," Mike commented, lowering himself into his armchair with a slight grimace. His shoulder ached from yesterday's swim, and the rest of his body was reminding him forcefully that he was no longer the young soldier who could push through physical discomfort without consequence. Stella watched him with those intelligent eyes, and Mike found himself talking to her as he might to a fellow soldier. "We'll figure out what those coordinates mean," he promised. "Find out who hurt you and why." Military dogs don't just end up abandoned without reason. The German shepherd sighed deeply, as if understanding every word. Perhaps she did. Her training would have made her exceptionally responsive to human communication. As night fell, Mike prepared for bed with a new awareness of responsibility. He checked the cabin's doors and windows, not just out of his usual security consciousness, but with a protective instinct toward the 2 new lives now under his care. He filled water bowls, ensured the puppy couldn't access anything dangerous during the night, and set out the medications Dr. Reynolds had prescribed. The last thing he did before retiring was to retrieve the slip of paper with the coordinates from his jacket pocket, placing it on the kitchen table for tomorrow's investigation. Whatever secret Stella had been entrusted to deliver, whatever danger she had faced to bring it to him, tomorrow they would begin to unravel the mystery. Sleep came more easily than it had in years, the sound of Stella's occasional movements and Max's tiny puppy snores creating a gentle soundtrack that soothed rather than disturbed. Yet his dreams were unsettled, filled with fragments of memory. Afghanistan, the fire that took his family, the look in Stella's eyes when she first appeared at his property. He woke before dawn to find Stella standing beside his bed, alert but not alarmed. The puppy's whimpering from the living room explained her presence. Max needed attention, probably a trip outside for nature's call. "Good girl," Mike murmured, impressed by her problem-solving. She had managed to navigate past the baby gate, come to alert him to her puppy's needs, all without barking or creating a disturbance. The next hour was spent in the pre-dawn darkness, Mike watching as Stella tended to her puppy, guiding the little one outside to the small fenced area they'd improvised yesterday, then back inside for nursing and play. The bond between mother and puppy was beautiful to witness. Stella's patience, Max's complete trust in her protection. By the time Martha arrived at 9, Mike had been up for hours, making coffee and reviewing the coordinates on an old map he'd found in a drawer. The location appeared to be in a rural area about 40 miles west of Clearwater Lake, near the small town of Windsor. "Morning," Martha greeted, her eyes immediately going to the dogs. "How was the first night?" "Better than expected," Mike replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Stella woke me when Max needed to go out. Smart dog." Martha accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Military training shows. How's your shoulder? I noticed you favoring it yesterday." Mike shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Old injury. The swim aggravated it, but it'll pass." Martha's expression made it clear she wasn't convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she joined him at the table, examining the map he'd been studying. "So, these are the coordinates, near Windsor?" "Looks that way. Rural area, not much out there from what I remember." "Farmland mostly," Martha confirmed. "A few old properties that have been abandoned since the economy tanked. Some hunting grounds." She traced the route with her finger. "About an hour's drive from here." They planned their day, first to Eldon for dog supplies, then to the coordinates to investigate what might have prompted Stella's desperate journey to find help. The mother dog seemed to understand they were discussing something important, her attention focused on them with almost human comprehension. The trip to Eldon's pet supply was an education for Mike. Martha guided him through selections of high-quality dog food, proper leashes and collars, bedding and toys appropriate for both an adult dog and a growing puppy. The store owner, a friendly woman in her 60s, was delighted to hear about the rescue and offered additional advice about caring for a puppy recovering from trauma. "Routine is important," she emphasized, ringing up their substantial purchase. "Dogs, especially ones with military training, thrive on knowing what to expect and when to expect it." Mike nodded, thinking of his own military days when routine had been the backbone of every operation, every day. Perhaps that was another reason Stella had sought him out. She sensed in him the ordered approach to life that her training had instilled. With the truck loaded with supplies, they stopped briefly at Mike's cabin to drop off the items and check on the dogs. Stella had maintained perfect house manners in their absence, and Max was visibly stronger, racing wobbly circles around the living room when they entered. "He's recovering well," Martha observed, kneeling to examine the puppy more closely. Amazing resilience. After settling the dogs with fresh water and food and securing the cabin, they prepared for the second phase of their day, investigating the mysterious coordinates. Mike had decided to bring Stella with them, leaving Max safely contained in the modified laundry room with plenty of bedding, water, and toys. "You sure it's a good idea to bring her?" Martha asked as they helped the mother dog into the truck. "Her wounds are still healing. She deserves to be part of this," Mike said simply. Whatever message she was carrying, she risked her life to deliver it. Besides, she might recognize something or someone that could help us understand what's going on. The drive to Windsor took them through increasingly rural landscape, farms giving way to scattered woods and overgrown fields as they approached the coordinates. Mike drove carefully, mindful of the precious cargo in his truck, Martha beside him, Stella sitting alertly in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the road ahead as if she recognized the journey. "Turn here," Martha directed, consulting the map as they approached a narrow dirt road barely visible among the high summer grasses. "According to this, the coordinates should be about 2 miles down this road." The truck bounced over the uneven surface, the road clearly long neglected. Trees crowded close on either side, branches occasionally scraping against the windows. In the back seat, Stella grew increasingly tense, a low whine escaping her throat. She knows this place, Mike observed, watching the dog in the rearview mirror. Look at her ears, her posture. She's been here before. The road ended abruptly at what appeared to be an abandoned property. A dilapidated farmhouse stood in a clearing, its windows boarded, its once white paint peeling to reveal weathered gray wood beneath. Behind it, a large barn listed slightly to one side, its red paint faded to a dull rust color. The whole scene had an air of neglect and abandonment. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in years," Martha commented as Mike parked the truck at the edge of the overgrown yard. But Mike's military instincts were on high alert. "Look closer," he said quietly, pointing toward the gravel area in front of the barn. "Fresh tire tracks. Multiple vehicles. Someone's been here, and recently." Stella's whine had intensified, her body rigid with tension. Whatever this place was, it clearly held strong associations for her, and not pleasant ones. "Stay here," Mike told Martha, reaching under his seat to retrieve the pistol he kept there, a habit from his military days that he'd never abandoned. "Let me check it out first." "I'm not staying in the truck while you play Rambo," Martha replied firmly. "We go together or not at all." Mike started to argue, then recognized the determined set of her jaw. "Fine, but stay behind me, and if I say run, you run. No questions." With Stella on a leash beside him and Martha following closely, Mike approached the farmhouse first. The front door was secured with a heavy padlock that showed signs of recent use. No rust, the metal clean where it had been handled. The boarded windows revealed nothing of the interior, but a faint odor emanated from the building, bleach, overlaying something less pleasant. "Someone's tried to clean up in there," Mike murmured, his unease growing. "Recently." They circled the house, finding all entrances similarly secured. The barn, however, presented a different picture. Its large sliding door was closed but not locked, a rusty track allowing it to be moved aside with some effort. Before Mike could slide the door open, Stella suddenly tensed, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Her attention was fixed on the barn door, hackles raised. "Something's wrong," Mike whispered, his hand moving to the pistol tucked into his waistband. "Stella senses something." Martha stepped closer to him, her earlier bravado tempered by the dog's obvious alarm. "Maybe we should call the sheriff." "And tell them what? That we followed mysterious coordinates from a dog's collar to an abandoned property?" Mike shook his head. "Let me just take a quick look inside, then we can decide our next move." With extreme caution, he slid the barn door open just enough to peer inside. The interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the few beams of sunlight that penetrated through gaps in the roof. At first glance, the barn appeared empty except for some old farm equipment and piles of moldering hay. But as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Mike noticed something that made his blood run cold. Along one wall stood a row of large metal cages, the kind used for transporting large dogs. Most were empty, their doors hanging open, but in the furthest cage a dark shape lay motionless. "Stay here," he told Martha more forcefully this time, handing her Stella's leash. "Keep her out here with you." Without waiting for a response, Mike slipped through the gap in the door, moving silently across the barn floor, pistol now drawn and ready. As he approached the cages, the smell hit him. Decay, waste, and beneath it all, the copper scent of blood. The shape in the last cage was indeed a dog, another German shepherd, but this one would never move again. From the state of decomposition, it had been dead for at least a few days. Around its neck was a collar similar to the military ones Mike remembered, but modified, with what appeared to be a small electronic device attached. A sound behind him made Mike whirl around, pistol raised, only to find Martha standing in the doorway, Stella straining at the leash beside her. "I told you to wait outside," he said, lowering the weapon. "And I ignored you," Martha replied, her voice tight. "What did you find?" Before Mike could answer, Stella broke free from Martha's grip, racing across the barn floor to the cages. She stopped at the one containing the dead shepherd, a high-pitched whine of distress escaping her. She knew this dog, Mike realized aloud, his suspicions crystallizing into a grim certainty. This wasn't just a random location. This was a holding facility of some kind. Martha had approached cautiously, her hand covering her nose and mouth against the smell. For dogs? But why? Who would? Her question was cut short by the unmistakable sound of vehicles approaching outside. Multiple engines, gravel crunching under tires. "We need to go," Mike said urgently, moving quickly back toward the door. "Now!" But it was too late. Through the gap in the barn door, they could see two black SUVs pulling up beside Mike's truck, men in tactical gear emerging with weapons drawn. "Back door," Mike whispered, pulling Martha toward the rear of the barn, where a smaller exit was visible. "We'll circle around through the woods to the truck." Stella followed silently, her military training evident in her immediate response to the tension in Mike's voice. They slipped out the back door into the afternoon sunlight, quickly taking cover behind a stack of old lumber as voices called out from the front of the property. "Thompson, we know you're here. Your truck is parked out front. Come out and let's talk." Mike froze. They knew his name. This wasn't a random encounter. They had been expected, or at least his presence had been anticipated. "Friends of yours?" Martha whispered, her face pale but composed. "Not likely," Mike replied grimly. He peered around the lumber pile, assessing their options. The woods began about 30 yards away, offering potential cover, but reaching them would mean crossing open ground in full view of anyone watching the back of the barn. "When I say go, we run for those trees," he instructed Martha. "Stay low, move fast, don't look back." Martha nodded, her jaw set with determination. Stella crouched beside them, alert and ready, sensing the danger with canine intuition. 3, 2, 1, go! They broke cover simultaneously, sprinting for the tree line. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a shout went up behind them, followed immediately by the crack of gunfire. A bullet splintered bark from a tree just ahead of them, confirming that their pursuers were shooting to kill, not to warn. The woods provided immediate, if limited, protection. Mike led them deeper into the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as possible, using his military training to choose a path that would be difficult to follow. Stella kept pace effortlessly, her movements silent despite her injuries, while Martha showed surprising stamina for a woman her age. "Who are these people?" she gasped when they paused briefly behind a fallen tree, the sounds of pursuit still audible but more distant now. "I don't know," Mike admitted, checking his pistol. A full magazine plus one in the chamber, 13 rounds total against unknown numbers. "But they're professionals, military or ex-military, from their gear and tactics. And they know your name." "Yes." That fact troubled Mike deeply. The only connection between him and this place was Stella, a military-trained dog who had somehow escaped and sought him out specifically. Either his involvement was anticipated, or someone had been watching his cabin, seen him find the coordinates, and followed them here. Neither option was comforting. "We need to keep moving," Mike decided, the sounds of pursuit growing closer again. "They'll have people circling to cut us off." They pressed on through the woods, changing direction frequently to confuse their trackers. Stella proved invaluable, her senses alerting them to approaching danger before human ears could detect it, allowing them to adjust their route accordingly. After nearly an hour of evasion, they reached the edge of the forest where it bordered a county road. No vehicles were visible in either direction, the rural route apparently unused at this time of day. "My truck is probably being watched," Mike said, assessing their options. "We need to find another way back." Martha pointed down the road. "There's a general store about 2 miles that way. They'll have a phone we can use." "Call who?" Mike asked grimly. "We don't know who these people are or who they might be connected to. Local sheriff? State police? Federal agencies? Who can we trust?" Martha's expression hardened with resolve. "We can trust Dr. Reynolds." He can pick us up without raising suspicions. And we need to get back to Max. He's alone at your cabin." The mention of the puppy galvanized Mike. In the chaos of their escape, he had momentarily forgotten about the vulnerable young dog waiting for them. If these people knew about Stella and the coordinates, they might know about Max too. "You're right," he conceded. "We call Bill, get back to the cabin, grab Max, and then figure out our next move." They set off down the county road, staying close to the tree line to duck for cover if any vehicles approached. Stella walked between them, alert for danger, occasionally looking up at Mike as if seeking reassurance that they were heading in the right direction. The general store was exactly as Martha had described, a small, weather-beaten building with a single gas pump outside and a payphone booth that looked like a relic from another era. The elderly proprietor eyed them curiously as they entered, taking in their disheveled appearance and the German shepherd at Mike's side. "Phone working?" Martha asked casually, as if they hadn't just fled through the woods from armed pursuers. "Yup," the man replied, pointing to the back corner. 50 cents for local calls." Mike kept watch by the window while Martha made the call, Stella sitting attentively at his feet. The store was otherwise empty, but the road outside remained a potential threat. "Bill's coming," Martha reported when she returned. 20 minutes. Said he was making a house call nearby anyway." They purchased water and beef jerky from the uninterested proprietor, who seemed more concerned with the baseball game playing on a small television behind the counter than with their unusual appearance. Outside, they waited in the shade of an old oak tree, all three drinking thirstily from their water bottles. "What happens when we get back?" Martha asked quietly. "Those men knew your name, knew you'd be at that barn. They could be waiting at your cabin right now." Mike had been considering the same problem. "We don't go directly to the cabin," he decided. "We have Bill drop us at the lake access point, approach on foot through the woods. If it looks clear, we get Max and whatever supplies we can quickly gather, then leave." And go where? It was a good question. Mike had lived at Clearwater Lake for 15 years, had no other property, no friends or family to shelter with. His life had been deliberately contracted to a small, manageable space that now, suddenly, was no longer safe. "I have a hunting cabin," Martha said, answering her own question. "About 30 miles north of here, in the Mark Twain National Forest. Isolated, hard to find unless you know where to look. We could go there, at least temporarily." Mike looked at her with newfound respect. "You have a hunting cabin?" Martha smiled slightly. "I wasn't always a retired nurse bringing casseroles to grumpy neighbors, you know. My late husband and I used to hunt deer every season. The cabin's small but serviceable. No electricity, but there's a propane stove and a hand pump for water." Before Mike could respond, Dr. Reynolds' pickup truck appeared on the road, slowing as it approached the store. The veterinarian looked concerned but not alarmed as they quickly climbed in, Stella jumping into the truck bed with surprising agility given her injuries. "Want to tell me why you're hiding behind a general store looking like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards?" Bill asked as they pulled back onto the road. "It's complicated," Mike replied, exchanging a glance with Martha. "And potentially dangerous. You sure you want to be involved?" Bill snorted. "I'm already involved. Besides, Martha saved my mother's life after her stroke. I owe her." "Where are we headed?" "Lake access point near my cabin," Mike directed. "And Bill?" "Thanks." The veterinarian nodded, his expression serious. "Whatever trouble you're in, it must be significant if it's got Martha Wilson breaking her perfect attendance record at the senior center lunch program." Despite the gravity of their situation, Martha smiled. "There's always next week, Bill." But as they drove toward Clearwater Lake, Mike wasn't so sure. Whatever they had stumbled upon, whatever secret Stella had been entrusted to reveal, had powerful, dangerous people willing to kill to protect it. And now those people knew his name, knew where he lived, and possibly knew about Max. The peaceful existence he'd carved out over 15 years of solitude had been shattered in the space of 48 hours. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like his former commanding officer whispered that this was just the beginning. Dr. Reynolds dropped them at the lake access point as requested, a small public boat launch about a quarter-mile from Mike's cabin. Before driving away, he pressed a paper bag into Martha's hands. "Antibiotics for the dogs," he explained, "and some first aid supplies. I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but you look like you might need these." "Thanks, Bill," Martha said quietly. "We'll explain everything when we can." The veterinarian nodded, his expression grave. "Be careful. And Martha, remember our conversation about the Anderson case last year? Might be relevant now." Mike watched this cryptic exchange with curiosity, but didn't ask for clarification as Bill drove away. There would be time for questions later, assuming they successfully retrieved Max and escaped whatever danger awaited them. "What's the plan?" Martha asked as they stood at the edge of the woods, Stella alert at Mike's side. "We approach from the lakeside," Mike decided. "Less visible, and the cabin has fewer windows facing that direction. I'll go in first, secure Max. You and Stella wait in the trees until I signal it's clear." Martha frowned. "And if it's not clear?" Mike patted the pistol tucked into his waistband. "Then I deal with it and you take Stella and run. Head for your hunting cabin, don't look back." "That's not a plan I'm comfortable with," Martha protested. "We stay together." Mike recognized the determined set of her jaw and knew further argument would be futile. "Fine, but you follow my lead. Stay behind me. If I say drop, you drop. If I say run, you run. Clear?" "Crystal," Martha replied dryly. "Now let's go get that puppy." They moved through the woods with as much stealth as possible, Mike leading the way with the practiced silence of his Special Forces training. Stella matched his movements precisely, her own training evident in the way she avoided twigs and leaves that might make noise. Martha did her best, though her occasional stumbles reminded Mike that she lacked their specialized background. As they neared the cabin, Mike signaled for them to stop, crouching behind a fallen log for cover. From this vantage point, they could observe the back of the property without being seen. Nothing appeared disturbed. No vehicles in sight, no obvious signs of intrusion. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, the lake beyond sparkling innocently as if the events of the past few hours had been merely a bad dream. "Looks quiet," Martha whispered. "Too quiet," Mike replied, his instincts humming with warning. No birds, no small animals. Something spooked them. They watched for several more minutes, Mike scanning every window, every potential hiding place around the property. Nothing moved, yet the sense of wrongness persisted. "We need to get closer," he finally decided. "Stay low, move only when I move." They advanced to the edge of the trees, now only about 50 yards from the back porch of the cabin. From this position, Mike could see that the back door was slightly ajar, a door he distinctly remembered Martha closing when they left. "Someone's been here," he whispered. "Or still is." Stella's ears were fully erect, her body tense but not alarmed, suggesting she didn't sense immediate danger but recognized something unusual. Mike wished, not for the first time, that the dog could speak and tell them exactly what she perceived. "What now?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. Mike considered their options. They needed to determine if the intruders were still present, and they needed to secure Max if possible. Direct approach was too risky without knowing what they faced. But perhaps— "Stella," he said softly, turning to the German shepherd. "Think she could help us?" Martha looked skeptical. "How?" "Military working dogs are trained for reconnaissance. If her training is what I think it is, she might be able to approach the cabin, check for threats, and return to us. And if whoever's in there sees her, they already tried to kill her once." It was a valid concern. Sending Stella into potential danger went against every protective instinct Mike had developed toward the dog over the past 2 days. And yet her training had prepared her for precisely these situations. Before Mike could decide, Stella made the choice for them. With a soft whine, she pressed her nose against his hand, then looked toward the cabin with clear intent. The intelligence in her amber eyes seemed to communicate understanding of their dilemma and willingness to help. "She wants to go," Martha observed quietly. Mike held Stella's gaze, remembering the countless missions where he'd trusted his life to the instincts and training of dogs just like her. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Go check," he commanded softly, using the hand signals he remembered from his military days. "Quiet! Return!" Stella hesitated only briefly, looking back once as if to confirm the order, then slipped away toward the cabin. Her movement was a marvel of stealth, low to the ground, utilizing every bit of available cover, pausing frequently to listen and observe, military training in perfect execution. Mike and Martha watched in tense silence as the German Shepherd reached the back porch, sniffed carefully at the partially open door, then disappeared inside the cabin. The seconds stretched into minutes, each moment of Stella's absence increasing Mike's anxiety. "Should she be taking this long?" Martha whispered after what felt like an eternity. Mike shook his head, his hand moving to the pistol at his waist. "No, something's wrong." Just as he was preparing to approach the cabin himself, Stella reappeared at the back door. She paused, looked around carefully, then trotted directly back to their position among the trees. Her demeanor was calm but purposeful, showing none of the tension that would indicate immediate danger. "What did she find?" Martha asked, as if the dog might answer directly. Stella came straight to Mike, pressing against his leg in what appeared to be a deliberate communication. There was no distress in her manner, but she seemed intent on conveying something. "I think it's clear," Mike interpreted, still wary but trusting the dog's assessment. "But something's different. She's trying to tell us something." "Max," Martha said suddenly. "Is Max still there?" At the puppy's name, Stella's ears perked up, her tail wagging slightly. Mike took this as confirmation. "Let's go," he decided. "Stay close. Stay alert." They approached the cabin cautiously. Mike in the lead with pistol drawn, Martha directly behind him, and Stella moving fluidly between them. At the back door, Mike paused for a final assessment before pushing it fully open and stepping inside. The interior of the cabin appeared largely undisturbed at first glance. The makeshift dog beds were still in place near the wood stove, water bowls in the kitchen untouched. But subtle signs of intrusion were evident to Mike's trained eye. A chair slightly out of position, the faint scuff of unfamiliar boot prints on the wooden floor. "Someone was definitely here," he murmured, moving further into the main room. "Recently." Stella trotted ahead toward the laundry room where they had left Max confined. The door was closed, just as they had left it, but something had been attached to the front, a small white envelope secured with tape. Mike approached cautiously, examining the envelope without touching it. No visible wires, no suspicious bulges that might indicate a trigger mechanism. After a careful assessment, he decided it wasn't an immediate threat and removed it from the door. Inside the laundry room, Max was thankfully present and unharmed. The puppy greeted them with enthusiastic yips and bounces, seemingly unaware of the danger that had so narrowly missed him. Stella immediately began checking him over, her maternal instincts evident in the thorough inspection she gave her offspring. "At least they didn't take him," Martha said with evident relief, kneeling to help Stella in her examination of the puppy. "He seems fine, hungry, but fine." Mike nodded absently, his attention focused on the envelope he had removed from the door. His name was written on the front in neat block letters. Michael Thompson. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a brief typewritten message. "We know who you are. We know about the dogs. Return what was taken and walk away, or next time we won't be so considerate. You have 48 hours. No signature, no explanation of what he was supposed to return, no contact information, just a threat, delivered with the confidence of people who expected to be obeyed. Mike? Martha's voice broke through his concentration. What is it? He handed her the note without comment, watching as her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. They were here while we were gone, she said, stating the obvious. They could have taken Max, but they didn't. Why? Leverage, Mike replied grimly. They're keeping options open. If we don't comply, the puppy would be their next target. Comply with what? What are we supposed to return? Mike shook his head. I don't know, but it has to be connected to Stella and whatever she was trying to show us at that barn. He looked at the German shepherd, who had finished inspecting her puppy and was now sitting at attention, watching them with those intelligent eyes. Whatever secret you were carrying, girl, it's valuable enough to kill for. Martha reread the note, her practical nature asserting itself. 48 hours. That gives us some time, at least. What's our next move? We can't stay here, Mike decided, already moving to gather essential supplies. They know where I live and they'll be back. We need to go to your hunting cabin, regroup, figure out what we're dealing with. They worked quickly, gathering dog food, medications, first aid supplies, clothing, and whatever non-perishable food was in the cupboards. Mike added his pistol cleaning kit, extra ammunition, a hunting knife, and a pair of binoculars to the growing pile. Martha found a backpack in a closet and efficiently packed the most critical items. What about this? She asked, holding up the piece of paper with the coordinates that had led them to the barn. Bring it, Mike said. And the metal capsule from the puppy's collar. They might contain other clues we missed. As they prepared to leave, Mike took one last look around the cabin that had been his sanctuary for 15 years. The simplicity that had once represented security now seemed like vulnerable isolation. The world he had withdrawn from had found him anyway, bringing with it danger but also, unexpectedly, connection. To Stella and Max, to Martha, to a purpose beyond mere existence. Ready? Martha asked, the backpack secured over her shoulders, Max cradled in her arms. Mike nodded, whistling softly for Stella to join them. We'll take the woods to the north shore. Circle around to where you parked your car at my place yesterday. With luck, they won't be watching it. Luck, it seemed, was with them. Martha's aging Subaru sat undisturbed in the small clearing where she had left it the previous day. A quick inspection revealed no obvious tampering, though Mike checked underneath for tracking devices or explosives before allowing Martha and the dogs to enter. The hunting cabin is about an hour's drive, Martha said, as they pulled onto the gravel road leading away from Clearwater Lake. Assuming no one follows us. Mike kept a vigilant eye on the side mirrors, watching for any sign of pursuit. Take the most indirect route possible. Multiple turns. Backtrack occasionally. Use every trick you know. Martha nodded, her hands steady on the wheel as she navigated the rural roads with surprising skill. I used to drive ambulances during my early nursing days, she explained, catching his appraising look. Learned a thing or two about evasive driving during the blizzard of '78. The journey to the hunting cabin took nearly 2 hours with their precautionary detours and backtracking. As they drove deeper into the Mark Twain National Forest, the roads became increasingly narrow and rough, eventually dwindling to little more than Forest Service tracks winding through dense woods. Almost there, Martha announced as they turned onto a nearly invisible path that would have been easy to miss without prior knowledge. My husband chose this location specifically because it was hard to find. Said it kept the city hunters away during deer season. The cabin, when it finally came into view, was even more modest than Mike had anticipated. A single-room structure built of rough-hewn logs, with a small, covered porch and a metal chimney pipe protruding from the roof. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering oak and hickory trees, a tiny human outpost in the vast wilderness. "It's not much," Martha acknowledged as they parked behind the cabin, hidden from the access path, "but it's solid and secure." Jack built it to last. Inside, the cabin was basic but surprisingly well maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small propane cooking stove beside it. A hand pump over a metal sink provided water, and simple wooden furniture, a table with 4 chairs, a storage chest, and 2 narrow beds, completed the furnishings. The walls were decorated with a few mounted antlers and faded photographs of Martha and a bearded man Mike assumed was her late husband, posing with various hunting trophies. "Home, sweet home," Martha said, setting Max down to explore their new surroundings. "At least for now." Mike secured the door and windows, his military training automatically assessing defensive positions and potential vulnerabilities. The cabin's isolation was both an advantage and a risk, difficult for pursuers to find but also cut off from potential assistance. "We should be safe here, at least temporarily," he concluded, satisfied with his inspection. "But we need a plan." They settled around the wooden table, Stella lying attentively at Mike's feet, while Max explored every corner of the cabin with puppy enthusiasm. The note from the intruders sat in the center of the table, its threat no less ominous for having been read multiple times. "Let's start with what we know," Martha suggested practically. "Stella is a military-trained dog who escaped from somewhere, found you specifically, and led you to those coordinates." Mike nodded. "At those coordinates, we found an abandoned farm being used to house military dogs, at least one of which was dead, and people with tactical training and equipment who knew my name were waiting for us. They want something returned that they think we took." "The only thing we took was Stella herself and Max," Mike pointed out, "and the metal capsule with the coordinates." Martha frowned thoughtfully. "Could there be something else?" "Something we're missing?" Mike considered this, his gaze falling on Stella. The German Shepherd returned his look steadily, her amber eyes seeming to hold secrets she couldn't communicate. "Maybe it's not something physical," he said slowly. "Maybe it's information, something Stella witnessed or knows." "But she's a dog, Mike. However well trained, she can't tell us what she saw." "No, but—" Mike paused, a memory surfacing from his military days. Some Special Forces K-9 units were equipped with specialized gear, body cameras, environmental sensors, recording devices. What if Stella was carrying something like that? They both turned to look at the German Shepherd, who had sat up at the increased attention, head tilted slightly as if trying to understand their conversation. "The collar," Martha realized. "You said the vet noticed marks where a collar had been forcibly removed. Standard military working dog collars include identification and sometimes equipment attachments," Mike confirmed, moving to kneel beside Stella. "May I?" he asked the dog directly, reaching slowly toward her neck. Stella sat perfectly still, allowing Mike to examine the healing abrasions around her neck. The marks were consistent with a collar being torn off with significant force, possibly in a struggle. But there was something else, a small patch of fur on the back of her neck that felt different, stiffer than the surrounding coat. "There's something here," Mike murmured, parting the fur carefully. "Some kind of residue." Martha came closer, her nurse's eyes more accustomed to examining subtle physical signs. "Adhesive," she identified after a careful look, "like from a medical patch or bandage." Something was attached to her skin here under the collar, perhaps. Mike sat back on his heels, the implications sinking in. "A monitoring device," he theorized, "or a small camera, something that recorded whatever Stella witnessed at that barn, and someone removed it, probably when they injured her. But she escaped before they could capture or kill her." Martha continued the thought. And somehow knew to find you specifically. The question is why? Mike stood pacing the small confines of the cabin as he worked through the puzzle. Why me? I've been out of the military for 15 years. I have no connection to whatever operation they're running with these dogs. Martha was silent for a moment, watching him pace. Maybe it's not about you specifically, she finally suggested. Maybe it's about what you represent. A former Special Forces K-9 handler who would recognize the military markings, understand the significance, know how to interpret what he saw, and who lives in convenient isolation away from authorities or witnesses, Mike added grimly. The perfect person to either help expose whatever's happening or to eliminate if necessary. The theory made sense, fitting the available facts while explaining the seemingly impossible coincidence of Stella finding him specifically. The German Shepherd hadn't necessarily sought Mike Thompson personally. She had sought someone with his background who could understand the message she carried. So what was happening at that barn? Martha asked, returning to the central mystery. Illegal training of military dogs, smuggling, experimentation. Mike's jaw tightened at the last suggestion. Whatever it is, it involves hurting dogs. The one we found was dead, possibly others too. And they were willing to kill us to protect their operation. Which means it's bigger than just animal abuse, Martha concluded, something with serious financial or national security implications. Max had finally exhausted himself with exploration and returned to Stella's side, curling up against her with a contented sigh. The mother dog gently nuzzled her puppy, the simple affection a stark contrast to the grim conversation taking place above them. We need more information, Mike decided, and we need to contact someone we can trust. This is beyond what we can handle alone. Martha nodded in agreement. But who? Not local authorities. In a rural area like this, everyone knows everyone. If these people have connections or resources, they could easily have contacts in local law enforcement. State police, FBI, Mike suggested, though without much conviction. Without concrete evidence or a clear crime to report, approaching official channels seemed unlikely to produce immediate results. What about that thing Bill said when he dropped us off? Mike asked suddenly. Something about the Anderson case? Martha's expression shifted, a new wariness entering her eyes. I wasn't sure if it was relevant, but last year a local family named Anderson found their hunting dogs poisoned. All 3 died. The official report said they likely got into some illegal pesticide, but Bill performed the necropsy and found something else. Injection marks, consistent with deliberate administration of a toxin. And this connects to our situation how? The Anderson property borders federal land where there's a research facility. Officially, it's agricultural research, but there have always been rumors about military contracts, classified work. Bill thought the dogs might have witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Mike absorbed this new information, the pieces beginning to form a disturbing pattern. How far is this research facility from here? About 20 miles northeast, Martha replied. But it's heavily secured, restricted access, not somewhere we could just walk up and ask questions. No, Mike agreed. But it gives us a potential connection. Military-trained dogs, secretive operations, willingness to eliminate witnesses. He looked down at Stella, who gazed back with unwavering trust. Whatever you saw, girl, it was important enough for someone to try to kill you. And now they're after us too. The gravity of their situation settled over the cabin like a physical weight. Outside, the forest had grown darker as evening approached, the wilderness that had initially offered sanctuary now seeming to close in around them, full of unseen threats and watchful eyes. We should eat something, Martha said finally, practical concerns asserting themselves, and rest while we can. Tomorrow we figure out our next move. As they prepared a simple meal from their hastily gathered supplies, Mike found himself watching Stella and Max with a protectiveness that surprised him in its intensity. Somehow, in the space of just a few days, these dogs had breached the walls he'd built around his heart after losing Sarah and Jamie. And Martha, with her quiet competence and unflinching courage, had become more than just a neighbor. She was now an ally, perhaps even a friend. For 15 years, Mike Thompson had existed in isolation, his world contracted to the small sphere of his lakeside cabin. Now that world had expanded again, bringing with it danger but also purpose, connection, responsibility. Whatever secret Stella had entrusted to him, whatever threat now hunted them, he would not face it alone. The note on the table promised consequences if they didn't comply within 48 hours. But compliance wasn't an option, not when it meant surrendering Stella and Max to people who had already tried to kill them once. Instead, they would use that time to uncover the truth, to understand what they had stumbled into, and to find a way to protect themselves and expose whatever dark operation was worth murdering for. As night fell completely outside the hunting cabin, Mike made a silent promise to the dogs now sleeping peacefully beside the fireplace. This time, unlike 15 years ago, he would not fail to protect those who depended on him. Whatever it took, whatever the risk, he would see this through. The hunt had begun, but this time, Mike Thompson was no longer the prey. He was the hunter. Dawn broke over the hunting cabin with gentle persistence, filtering through the small windows in dusty shafts of gold. Mike woke instantly, the military habit of full alertness upon waking still ingrained after all these years. For a moment, the unfamiliar surroundings disoriented him, but then the events of the previous day rushed back with clarity. Stella lay near the door, her head resting on her paws, but her eyes open and watchful. She'd maintained her vigil through the night, it seemed, guarding while the humans slept. Max was curled against Martha's side on one of the narrow beds, the puppy having apparently abandoned his mother at some point during the night in favor of human warmth. "Good morning," Martha said softly, her eyes open though she hadn't moved to avoid disturbing the sleeping puppy. "Any trouble in the night?" Mike shook his head. "Quiet." "Too quiet, almost." "That's the forest for you," Martha replied, carefully extracting herself from Max's slumbering form. "Especially this deep in. Not many people come out this far." They prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and granola bars from their supplies, moving about the small cabin with a domestic ease that belied the danger of their situation. Stella accepted her portion of dog food with dignified appreciation, while Max attacked his with puppyish enthusiasm once Martha woke him. "So," Martha said as they sat at the small table, mugs of steaming coffee warming their hands against the morning chill, "what's the plan for today?" Mike had been considering this question since waking. The 48-hour deadline from the note meant they had limited time to act, but rushing blindly would be foolish. They needed information, allies, and a strategy. "First, we need to understand what we're dealing with," he began. "That means learning more about this research facility you mentioned and its potential connection to military dog training." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "There's an old ranger station about 5 miles from here. Should have a landline phone we could use. Cell service is non-existent out here." "Good. I have some contacts from my military days who might be able to provide information without raising too many official flags. But we'll need to be careful. If this operation has the resources we've seen, they might be monitoring communications." "And after that?" Mike's gaze settled on Stella, who was now grooming her puppy with methodical care. "We need to figure out exactly what Stella witnessed or was carrying that made her such a target. That's the key to all of this." The morning passed with careful preparation. They inventoried their supplies, mapped potential escape routes from the cabin using an old forestry map Martha's husband had left tacked to one wall, and prepared the few weapons they had: Mike's pistol, a hunting rifle Martha produced from a locked cabinet, and a variety of knives. Around mid-morning, they set out for the ranger station, leaving Max safely secured in the cabin. The puppy protested this separation with pitiful whines, but Stella seemed to understand the necessity, giving her offspring a reassuring nuzzle before joining Mike and Martha on their trek through the forest. The ranger station was a small, weathered structure that had clearly seen better days. A sign on the door indicated it was only staffed during fire season and hunting season, neither of which was currently active. The door was locked, but Martha produced a key from her pocket with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Jack used to volunteer with the Forest Service," she explained. They never asked for the key back after he passed. Inside, the station was dusty but intact, basic furnishings covered with protective sheets. A desk with an older model telephone sat in one corner, and maps of the national forest covered the walls, marked with trails, access roads, and restricted areas. Mike immediately went to the phone, relieved to hear a dial tone when he lifted the receiver. From memory, he dialed a number he hadn't used in over a decade, uncertain if it would still connect him to the person he sought. After several rings, a gruff voice answered. "Richards? Colonel, it's Thompson. Michael Thompson." A pause, then recognition. "Mike? Jesus. It's been, what, 15 years? Thought you fell off the face of the earth after—" The voice trailed off, not finishing the reference to the tragedy that had driven Mike into isolation. "I need your help, sir," Mike said, bypassing the awkward moment. "It's about military working dogs." He explained the situation as concisely as possible. Stella's appearance at his property, her military training markers, the coordinates that led to the barn with caged dogs, and the armed men who had pursued them. He carefully avoided mentioning Martha or their current location, aware that the fewer details shared, the safer they would be if the call was somehow compromised. Colonel Richards listened without interruption, then asked several pointed questions that confirmed he was taking the situation seriously. "This is concerning, Mike, very concerning. There are no authorized operations involving K-9 units in your region that I'm aware of, and the tactics you've described, civilian targeting, lethal force, those aren't sanctioned procedures. So we're dealing with something off the books," Mike concluded. "Private contractors, maybe? Or rogue elements? Possibly." There have been some concerning reports over the past year about missing military working dogs, retirees disappearing from their adoptive homes, a few active-duty dogs reported lost during training exercises. Nothing that created a major flag individually, but in aggregate. "A pattern," Mike finished. "Someone's collecting military-trained dogs. The question is why. And how they knew to target you specifically," Richards added. "Your background with K-9 units isn't common knowledge anymore. Most of our operations were classified, and your retirement has been comprehensive." Mike had considered this angle already. "They may not have targeted me initially. Stella might have escaped and sought someone with handler training instinctively. Once I found the coordinates, they could have been watching the barn, seen us arrive." "Possible," Richards acknowledged. "Listen, Mike, I can make some discreet inquiries, see if there's any chatter about unauthorized K-9 operations or private contractors working with military dogs, but it will take time, and it sounds like you don't have much of that. Any information helps, sir, and we might need extraction if things go south." The colonel didn't miss Mike's slip into plural pronouns. "We? You're not alone in this?" Mike hesitated, then decided honesty with his former commanding officer was worth the risk. "I have a neighbor with me, Martha Wilson, former Army nurse, and the 2 dogs, Stella and her puppy." "Understood. I'll see what I can do. Call this number in 24 hours. Richards provided a different contact number, then added, "And Mike, be careful. If these people are operating outside military authority with trained canine units, they're dangerous and well-connected. Watch your six. Always do, sir. Thank you. After ending the call, Mike joined Martha at the wall maps, where she was studying the area surrounding the research facilities she had mentioned. "Good news," she said without looking up. "I found the facility on the map. And there's something else, an unmarked access road that leads from the main research center to a secondary location here." She pointed to a small clearing about 5 miles from the primary facility. "Jack once told me he found strange fencing out there while hunting, and was warned off by armed security who claimed it was a wildlife research area." Mike examined the location she indicated. It was isolated, accessible only by the unmarked road and surrounded by dense forest. A perfect location for activities one wished to keep hidden from the main research facility. "How far is it from here?" "About 15 miles as the crow flies, probably 20 by road or trail." Mike considered their options. Approaching the facility directly would be suicidal given the security Martha described, but reconnaissance of the secondary location might yield valuable information without exposing them to the full security apparatus. "We need to check it out," he decided. "Not a direct approach, just close enough to observe and gather intelligence." Martha nodded in agreement. "What did your contact say?" Mike summarized his conversation with Colonel Richards, encouraged by the confirmation that whatever was happening with military dogs was unauthorized. It meant they were dealing with criminals, not an official operation that might bring the full weight of military or government resources against them. "So we have potential backup, but not immediately," Martha concluded. "We're on our own for now." "For now," Mike agreed. "Let's get back to the cabin, prepare for a reconnaissance mission. We'll leave at dusk, use darkness for cover." The return journey through the forest was uneventful, though Mike noticed Stella seemed more alert than before, her head lifting occasionally to test the air, or her ears swiveling to track sounds beyond human perception. Whether she sensed actual danger or was simply responding to the heightened tension was impossible to determine, but her vigilance kept Mike on edge. At the cabin, they found Max safe and ecstatic at their return, bouncing around Stella's legs with puppyish joy. The mother dog endured this exuberance with patient dignity, though Mike noticed her checking her offspring for any signs of distress or injury, a mother's instinct that transcended species. The remainder of the day was spent in careful preparation. They packed a small backpack with essentials for their night reconnaissance: water, energy bars, first aid supplies, extra ammunition, and a flashlight with the lens taped to reduce its visible signature. Martha produced a pair of night vision binoculars from the hunting supplies, old but functional, which would prove invaluable for observing the facility under cover of darkness. As evening approached, they faced a difficult decision regarding the dogs. Max was clearly too young for a potentially dangerous mission, but leaving him alone at the cabin seemed equally risky. And Stella, while valuable for her military training and sensory capabilities, might be recognized by those connected to the facility if she had indeed escaped from there. "Stella comes with us," Mike finally decided. "Her training will be an asset, and she might recognize the location or personnel if it's where she was held. Max stays here, secured in the bathroom where he'll be safe and can't get into trouble." Martha looked doubtful. "Leaving a puppy alone for hours?" "We don't have better options," Mike pointed out gently. "We'll leave him with food, water, bedding, and toys. The bathroom is puppy-proofed, and we won't be gone longer than necessary." With obvious reluctance, Martha helped prepare the small bathroom for Max, creating a comfortable bed from towels and placing water, food, and several toys within easy reach. The puppy seemed confused by this arrangement, but settled down with one of his toys, blissfully unaware of the danger that necessitated such precautions. As dusk settled over the forest, they prepared for departure. Mike checked his pistol one final time, while Martha shouldered the backpack and secured the hunting rifle in its sling across her back. Stella stood attentively by the door, her posture making it clear she understood they were embarking on a mission of some kind. "Ready?" Mike asked, meeting Martha's eyes with a seriousness that acknowledged the risk they were undertaking. She nodded, her expression resolute. "As I'll ever be." They moved through the darkening forest with deliberate care, following game trails where possible to minimize noise and evidence of their passage. Mike led the way, using the forestry map and a small compass to navigate toward the secondary facility Martha had identified. Stella kept pace beside him, her movements nearly silent despite her size, occasionally pausing to test the air or listen before proceeding. The journey took longer than anticipated, the forest terrain more challenging to navigate in the growing darkness than Mike had expected. It was nearly midnight when they finally reached a ridge overlooking their objective, a small clearing containing what appeared to be a series of low, prefabricated buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. From their elevated position approximately 300 yards away, they could see security lighting illuminating the perimeter and what appeared to be a guard station at the single gated entrance. 2 vehicles were parked in a small lot, nondescript black SUVs similar to those that had pursued them at the abandoned barn. "Definitely not a wildlife research station," Martha whispered as they observed the facility through the night vision binoculars. "Too much security." Mike nodded in agreement, taking his turn with the binoculars to study the layout. 2 visible guards at the entrance, probably more inside or patrolling the perimeter. Motion sensors on the fence line, judging by those boxes mounted every 50 feet or so. Beside him, Stella had gone rigid, her attention fixed on the facility below. A low growl, almost too quiet to hear, rumbled in her chest. "She recognizes it," Martha observed. "Or something about it." "This has to be where she escaped from," Mike agreed. "Look at her reaction." They continued their observation for nearly an hour, noting shift changes among the guards, the patterns of patrols, and the occasional movement of personnel between buildings. Nothing they saw suggested a legitimate research operation. No markings on the buildings, no identification on the few people visible, no indication of the facility's purpose beyond the high security. "We need to get closer," Mike finally decided. "See if we can determine what's happening inside those buildings." Martha looked skeptical. "That's a lot of security to bypass." "We won't try to enter," Mike clarified. "Just get close enough to see through windows, maybe pick up conversations. The tree line extends to within about 50 yards of the fence on the east side. We can approach from there, stay in cover." After careful consideration, Martha nodded her agreement. They worked their way down from the ridge, circling wide to approach the facility from the eastern side where the forest provided maximum cover. The process was slow, each movement calculated to minimize noise and visibility. As they drew closer to the perimeter fence, Stella's behavior became increasingly tense. Her ears were flattened against her head, and though she remained obediently at Mike's side, her entire body radiated discomfort and what Mike could only interpret as fear. "She doesn't want to be here," Martha whispered, noticing the same signs. "This is definitely where she was held." Mike paused, crouching to Stella's level and gently stroking her head. "It's okay, girl," he murmured. "We're not going in. We're just looking. I promise." The German shepherd looked at him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Mike had the distinct impression she understood exactly what he was saying. After a moment, her posture relaxed slightly, though the alertness remained. They continued their careful approach until they reached the edge of the tree line, now approximately 60 yards from the perimeter fence. From this position, they had a clear view of the easternmost building, a long, low structure with few windows, all of which were covered with what appeared to be blackout curtains. As they watched, a door opened on the side of the building. spilling yellow light briefly into the darkness. Two figures emerged, a man in tactical clothing similar to those who had pursued them at the barn, and a woman in what appeared to be a lab coat. They were engaged in conversation, their voices just barely audible from Mike and Martha's position. "Scheduled for tomorrow night," the woman was saying. "The buyers are getting impatient." "Not my problem," the man replied. "Security is my concern, and after the breach last week, I'm not taking any chances. Double the usual personnel for the transfer." "Unnecessary expense," the woman argued. "We lost one dog, not the entire program. That one dog was carrying enough data to expose the entire operation. Until we recover it or confirm it's been neutralized, we maintain maximum security." Mike and Martha exchanged glances in the darkness, the significance of the conversation clear. Stella had indeed been carrying something valuable, data of some kind, likely in the device that had been attached to her neck, beneath her collar. The conversation continued, the woman eventually conceding to the security demands with obvious reluctance. As they moved away from the building toward the main facility, Mike caught one final exchange that sent a chill through him. "Any progress locating the Thompson subject?" "Last known position was near Clearwater Lake, but the trail's gone cold. Possible he's gone to ground or left the area entirely." "Find him. The deadline expires tomorrow night. After that, eliminate him and anyone with him." "We can't risk exposure this close to completion." The door to the main building closed behind them, cutting off any further conversation. Mike and Martha remained frozen in their hiding place, the implications of what they'd heard sinking in. "They're serious about killing us," Martha whispered, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "And whatever they're doing here involves selling something to buyers tomorrow night." Mike nodded grimly. "Military-trained dogs, most likely. The question is, who are the buyers and what are they planning to use the dogs for?" Before Martha could respond, Stella suddenly tensed beside them, her head swinging toward the forest behind them. A low, warning growl vibrated in her chest. "Someone's coming," Mike whispered, immediately alert to the change in the dog's behavior. "Back into the trees now." They retreated deeper into the forest as quietly as possible, Stella leading the way with an urgency that communicated the immediacy of the threat. They had moved perhaps 50 yards when the sound of voices and flashlight beams confirmed the dog's warning. A patrol was moving through the forest, approaching their former position. "Regular perimeter sweep," Mike guessed, pulling Martha behind a fallen tree for cover. "Must have just missed them on our approach." They remained motionless as the patrol passed nearby, two men in tactical gear carrying rifles, accompanied by what appeared to be a Doberman on a short lead. The dog was clearly trained for tracking, its nose to the ground as it moved methodically through the underbrush. Beside them, Stella had gone completely still, her training evident in her absolute silence, despite the proximity of the other dog. Mike placed a reassuring hand on her back, feeling the tense muscles beneath her fur. The patrol continued past their hiding place without pausing, the Doberman apparently not detecting their scent. Once the lights and voices had faded into the distance, Mike signaled for them to move, heading away from the facility at a tangent to avoid any chance of encountering the patrol again. They maintained silence until they were well clear of the facility, the forest dark and quiet around them. Finally, when Mike was confident they weren't being pursued, he allowed them to pause and assess what they had learned. "They're selling trained military dogs to buyers tomorrow night," he summarized, and Stella was carrying data that could expose the operation, probably evidence of illegal activities, training methods, client lists, something incriminating enough to justify killing to protect it. Martha nodded, her expression grim in the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. "And they're still hunting for us, with a deadline of tomorrow night." After that, they moved to eliminate rather than capture. Which means we have less than 24 hours to figure out what to do with this information, Mike concluded. We need to contact Colonel Richards again, share what we've learned. And Max, Martha added, concern evident in her voice. We need to get back to him. The return journey to the hunting cabin was tense but uneventful, both humans and dog acutely aware of the danger that might be following them. They took a circuitous route, doubling back occasionally to ensure they weren't being tracked, which extended their journey well into the early hours of the morning. The cabin appeared undisturbed when they finally reached it, no signs of intrusion or surveillance evident in the pre-dawn light. Inside, Max greeted them with delirious puppy joy, apparently no worse for his hours of solitude beyond a puddle in one corner of the bathroom that Martha quickly cleaned without comment. As Martha prepared a simple meal from their supplies, Mike sat at the table with a notepad, jotting down everything they had learned and seen at the facility. The picture that emerged was disturbing. A covert operation training and selling military dogs to unnamed buyers, willing to kill to protect their activities, and with enough resources and connections to track down a retired Special Forces soldier living in isolation. We need to stop the sale, Mike said finally, looking up from his notes. Whatever they're planning, it involves trained military dogs being sold to people who presumably don't have authorization to acquire them. That's a national security issue at minimum, potentially much worse. Martha paused in her preparations, considering his words. How? We're two people against what seems to be a well-funded, well-armed organization. Even with your military background, those aren't good odds. Mike's gaze shifted to Stella, who lay near the door with Max curled against her side. Both dogs finally relaxed in the safety of the cabin. We have something they want, he said quietly, something they're actively searching for. Stella, Martha looked alarmed. You're not suggesting we use her as bait? Not exactly, Mike clarified. But we can use their search for her, and for us, to our advantage. Draw their attention while alerting authorities to the sale. That's incredibly risky, Martha pointed out. And who would we alert? We don't know who might be compromised or involved. Mike considered this valid concern. Colonel Richards, he has the connections to mobilize a response without going through potentially compromised local channels. But we'd need to give him actionable intelligence, exact location, time, evidence of illegal activity. Which means we'd need to be there when the sale happens, Martha concluded, understanding his direction. To document it, provide real-time intelligence. Yes, dangerous, but potentially our best chance to expose the operation and protect ourselves. Once the authorities are involved, killing us becomes more liability than protection. They discussed the possibilities well into the morning, weighing risks against potential outcomes, considering and discarding various approaches. Eventually, a plan began to take shape, not without significant danger, but with a realistic chance of success given their limited resources. We'll need to move Max to a safer location first, Mike said, the puppy's vulnerability a primary concern. Somewhere they can't find him if things go wrong. Martha nodded in agreement. I have a friend in Colombia, about 2 hours from here. Retired veterinary technician, she'd take him without asking too many questions. Good. And we'll need equipment. A camera with zoom capability, something to record the sale as evidence. Jack's old hunting camera is in the storage chest. It has decent zoom and night vision capability. Used it for documenting deer patterns. As the plan solidified, Mike found himself studying Martha with newfound respect. At 65, she should have been enjoying a peaceful retirement, yet here she was, calmly planning what amounted to a surveillance operation against armed hostiles. The nurse who had brought him occasional casseroles for 15 years had revealed depths of courage and resourcefulness he hadn't anticipated. You don't have to do this, he said suddenly. This started with me and Stella. You could take Max to your friend in Colombia and stay there, safe, while I handle the rest. Martha looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled slightly, a determined glint in her eyes. Michael Thompson, I spent 20 years as an Army nurse in combat zones from Vietnam to Desert Storm. I've been shot at, mortared, and evacuated under fire. I may be retired, but I'm not helpless, and I'm certainly not abandoning you now. Mike nodded, accepting her decision with a mixture of concern and gratitude. Then we do this together. But first, we contact Richards, give him what we know so far, and set up the response for tomorrow night. The remainder of the day was devoted to preparations, gathering equipment, planning approach routes and fallback positions, discussing contingencies. Through it all, Stella remained close to Mike, her attention focused on him with an intensity that suggested she understood the significance of their preparations. As evening approached again, Mike used the phone at the ranger station to make the promised contact with Colonel Richards. The conversation was brief but productive. Richards had made discreet inquiries and discovered troubling connections between a private military contractor called Nexus Operations and reports of missing military working dogs. The timing aligned with what Mike and Martha had uncovered. "This is bigger than we thought, Mike," Richards said, his voice grave. "Nexus has contracts with several foreign governments, some of them not particularly friendly to U.S. interests. If they're selling trained military dogs with specialized capabilities, it could compromise operational security, expose tactics, even endanger personnel," Mike finished, the implications clear to someone with his background. "We've confirmed a sale is happening tomorrow night at the location I described. We'll be in position to provide real-time intelligence and documentation." "Too risky," Richards objected. "These people have already demonstrated willingness to kill." "Let me handle it from here. With all due respect, sir, you need evidence to move against a private contractor with government connections. We can provide that, and we're already compromised. They're hunting us regardless. This way, at least our risk serves a purpose." After further discussion, Richards reluctantly agreed to the plan. He would position a rapid response team nearby, ready to move in once Mike provided confirmation and evidence of the illegal sale. The timing would be critical. Intervene too early, and the buyers might never appear. Too late, and Mike and Martha could be discovered or the sale completed. As they returned to the cabin after the call, the weight of what lay ahead settled over them. Tomorrow night they would deliberately place themselves in proximity to people who wanted them dead, hoping to gather evidence of a crime before being discovered. The odds weren't favorable, but it was their best chance to end the threat permanently. In the small cabin, with darkness falling outside and the forest sounds creating a deceptively peaceful backdrop, Mike found himself watching Stella and Max with a familiar ache in his chest. 15 years ago he had failed to protect his family. Tomorrow night would test whether he had learned from that failure or was doomed to repeat it. Martha seemed to sense his thoughts. "We'll make it through this," she said quietly, sitting beside him at the table. "All of us." Mike nodded, wanting to believe her. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As Martha prepared for bed, Mike remained at the table, making final notes and adjustments to their plan. Stella left her sleeping puppy to come sit beside him, her head resting lightly against his leg in a gesture of companionship or perhaps reassurance. "I won't let them take you back," Mike promised softly, his hand gently stroking her head. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you and Max will be safe." "That's a promise." Stella looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand far more than a dog should, and in that moment, Mike Thompson made a second, silent promise to himself. This time, unlike 15 years ago, he would be there when it mattered. This time, he would protect those who depended on him, whatever the cost. Tomorrow would determine if he could keep that promise. Life's greatest gifts often come when we least expect them. Mike Thompson thought his story had ended 15 years ago with unimaginable loss, retreating to a solitary existence where pain couldn't find him. But fate had other plans when a wounded German shepherd appeared at his doorstep, carrying not just her puppy's future, but Mike's redemption in her amber eyes. Through danger and discovery, Mike found something he never thought possible again: purpose, connection, and the courage to care deeply. Sometimes our deepest wounds become the doorway to our second chances, if only we're brave enough to step through. Martha Wilson understood this when she said, "Some wounds never heal, but that doesn't mean we stop living." Whether you've experienced loss, retirement, or simply feel the world has moved on without you, remember that new beginnings don't have an age limit. Your story isn't over. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to reveal its most beautiful chapter. Has an unexpected encounter ever changed the direction of your life? What second chances are you grateful for? We'd love to hear your stories of unexpected blessings in the comments below.